Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Giovanni's, the most expensive Italian restaurant in Manhattan, and every patron inside had stopped eating to watch the confrontation unfolding at table 12. Evelyn Thornton stood there, Valentino dress dripping with carbonara sauce, her hand trembling as she pointed at the man who had just destroyed $5,000 of couture. But the dress was the least of her concerns. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. She knew this face. The sharp jaw, the green eyes wide with horror, the athletic build now frozen in mortification. Her voice came out as a whisper that somehow carried across the hushed dining room. "You're the one. The man from the fertility clinic waiting room. The one who said the cruelest thing anyone has ever said to me." Dashiell Thorne looked up from where sauce dripped off his sleeve, his 6-year-old daughter clutching his leg in terror. The color drained from his face as memory dawned in those green eyes, and for a moment the chaos of the restaurant faded into silence. His voice was barely audible. "Oh God, you're the ice queen who made my daughter cry." A small voice piped up from behind his legs. "Daddy, that's the sad, pretty lady from the doctor." What happened next would require understanding how these two people who clearly despised each other from that first moment ended up in a situation where Evelyn would ask Dash for something that would change both their lives forever. To understand that the story needed to rewind 17 weeks to the moment when Evelyn Ashworth Thornton made a decision that would bring her entire carefully constructed world crashing down around her. Evelyn had spent her entire 34 years building walls. Not the kind anyone could see, but the kind that kept everyone at a calculated distance. With her chestnut hair that fell in glossy waves past her shoulders, porcelain skin that had graced business magazine covers, and a figure that made designers beg her to wear their collections, she could have had anyone. That was precisely the problem. Everyone wanted something from her, her money, her connections, her influence. Nobody had ever wanted just her. The conference room on the 47th floor of Thornton Tower felt like a temple to corporate power. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table, each one representing billions in collective wealth, and not one of them dared interrupt as Evelyn reviewed the merger proposal. Her Armani suit was the color of gunmetal, her hair swept into a flawless twist, her expression revealing nothing as she turned page after page. Harold Westbrook, the CFO, shifted in his seat, sweat beaded at his temple despite the aggressive air conditioning. He had worked for 3 Thornton generations and had never seen anyone read contracts the way Evelyn did, like a hunter tracking prey through dense forest, missing nothing. She paused on page 47. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Her manicured nail tapped the paragraph once, twice. "Here, section 12.4. Your projected revenue is off by 2.3%. Rerun the numbers before I sign anything." Westbrook's face went pale as he double-checked his calculations. The other board members looked away, suddenly fascinated by their water glasses. "You're absolutely right, Miss Thornton. I apologize." "Don't apologize. Fix it. We reconvene at 4. They scattered like birds from a gunshot. Evelyn remained seated as the room emptied, her assistant Melissa approaching with coffee on a tray that rattled slightly. The cup was set down without a word exchanged, just a nod of acknowledgement that felt more like a dismissal. Melissa retreated quickly, the door clicking shut with a sound that seemed to echo in the vast space. Evelyn turned her chair toward the windows. Manhattan spread below her like a kingdom sunset, painting the skyline in shades of gold and crimson that should have been beautiful. She felt absolutely nothing. The emptiness had become so familiar that she barely noticed it anymore, like a hollow space inside her chest where something warm should have existed. Her phone buzzed. Mother, of course. The text didn't require opening to know its contents, some variation of the same demand Catherine Thornton had been making for the past 3 years. When would Evelyn settle down, produce an heir, fulfill her duty to the family legacy? The coffee sat untouched, growing cold. Evelyn's contact list showed 847 names. Business partners, lawyers, investors, vendors, society acquaintances. She scrolled through the entire list twice, looking for someone she could call just to talk someone who might care how her day had been. The search ended the same way it always did. Phone returned to the desk, the penthouse apartment, waiting above like a beautifully decorated prison cell. Catherine Thornton did not knock. She never had, not even when Evelyn was a child, not even now when her daughter was a grown woman with her own home. The sound of heels on marble announced her arrival 3 seconds before she swept into the penthouse mink coat and pearls, and the kind of posture that suggested steel rods had replaced her spine. The white-gloved inspection began immediately. Catherine's eyes tracked across surfaces, hunting for imperfection, the way a jeweler hunts for flaws in diamonds. Dust on the eastern bookshelf, Evelyn. Your housekeeper is getting lazy. Hello, Mother. I didn't know you were coming. If I needed permission to enter my daughter's home, I would have failed as a mother. Catherine settled into the chair at the head of the dining table as though she owned it. Which technically she did. The penthouse had been a gift on Evelyn's 30th birthday, though gifts from Catherine always came with invisible strings attached. Dinner appeared as if summoned by telepathy. Catherine had brought her private chef, of course. The woman worked in the kitchen without making a sound, producing a meal that belonged in a Michelin-starred restaurant. The table setting was formal enough for a state dinner. Evelyn sat across from her mother and felt like a child again, constantly monitored for posture, for proper fork technique, for any sign of weakness. Catherine sliced her filet mignon with surgical precision. You're 34 years old. The biological clock doesn't care about board meetings or quarterly earnings. Evelyn set down her fork with deliberate care. I'm aware of my age, Mother. Awareness without action is worthless. The Thornton family needs an heir. Find a suitable man, marry him, produce a child. In that order, it's not complicated. What if I wanted a child without a husband? The knife came down hard enough to ring against the china. Catherine's eyes went cold in a way that Evelyn remembered from childhood, the look that preceded punishments delivered not in anger, but in calculated cruelty. A single mother, a Thornton, raising a child alone like some common working-class woman. You would make this family a laughingstock. Plenty of successful women. We are not plenty of women, we are Thorntons. This is not your life to squander on sentimental notions about modern family structures. This is my legacy, and you will not destroy it because you've suddenly developed feelings. Evelyn stood her chair, scraping back. This is my life, Mother. Catherine rose as well, matching her daughter's height and her Louboutin heels. No, this is my investment. 34 years of training, education, grooming for leadership. I will not watch you throw it away. She left without another word, the door closing with the kind of soft click that was somehow more devastating than a slam. Evelyn stood alone in her penthouse, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people's homes, and felt the walls closing in. The memory came unbidden, the way trauma always does. She was 8 years old, small hands holding a kitten she had found shivering in the alley behind their estate. The tiny thing was orange and white eyes, barely open, mewing pitifully. Evelyn had smuggled it into her room, fed it milk from a dropper, named it Whiskers. For 3 days she had felt something other than fear and loneliness she had felt needed. Catherine discovered the kitten on day 4. The sounds it made had given away its hiding spot. Her mother had not yelled. Yelling would have been preferable. Instead, Catherine had made Evelyn carry the kitten outside herself, had made her put it down in the rain, had watched her daughter walk away from the only thing she had ever loved unconditionally. When Evelyn had cried, sobbed really, the kind of tears that shook her whole small body, Catherine had locked her in her room for 24 hours. Thornton women do not cry. Tears are weapons of the weak. When I open this door tomorrow, you will be stronger. The door had opened exactly 24 hours later. Evelyn had not cried since, not once in 26 years. The ability had been carefully, methodically trained out of her, the way one might train an animal out of unwanted behaviors. The fertility clinic was white and sterile and filled with hope that felt foreign to Evelyn. She sat in Dr. Patricia Simmons's examination room, hands folded in her lap, posture perfect, even on the uncomfortable paper-covered table. The doctor was reviewing test results with the kind of gentle expression people used when delivering bad news to patients they pitied. Miss Thornton, the results indicate premature ovarian insufficiency. It's relatively rare at your age, but not unheard of. Evelyn's voice remained steady, meaning natural conception would be extremely unlikely, less than a 5% chance. IVF could potentially help, but even that would be challenging given your hormone levels. What are my options? Dr. Simmons pulled out pamphlets with pastel colors and smiling families. IVF with donor eggs, surrogacy, adoption. There's also an increasingly popular option called intentional co-parenting Two people agreeing to raise a child together without a romantic relationship. Legal documented, more common than you might think. Evelyn took the pamphlets without looking at them. She thanked the doctor with the polite smile she had perfected over decades of business negotiations and charity galas. In the Tesla on the way home, she finally opened the co-parenting brochure. Testimonials from smiling strangers filled the pages. My co-parent and I have raised two wonderful children. You don't need marriage to build a family. Her hands trembled the first crack in her armor. The driver pretended not to notice. Evelyn stared at the pamphlet and whispered to herself, barely audible over the city traffic. What if this is the only way? The thought crystallized into decision over the following week. She did not want an anonymous donor from a catalog reduced to statistics about height and education and eye color. She did not want a surrogate who would carry her child like a rented womb. She wanted something real. A father who actually knew how to love unconditionally, who would be present, who would never make her child feel the way Catherine had made her feel. Finding such a person seemed impossible until the obvious solution presented itself. Where did parents go when they needed help? Where did people demonstrate their capacity for love in the most vulnerable way possible? Evelyn returned to Riverside Fertility Center, not as a patient seeking treatment, but as an observer, hunting for something she could not quite name. She told herself she was being logical, practical, scientific about this. The truth was messier and more desperate, but Evelyn had spent her life avoiding truth when it was inconvenient. Across the city, in a cramped office that smelled like old coffee and broken dreams, Dashiell Thorne was having the worst day of a very bad year. Morrison, the senior partner who had been his mentor since graduate school, sat behind his desk wearing the expression people got before delivering bad news they felt guilty about. Your design work is exceptional, Dash. The warehouse conversion project is brilliant. Dash felt his stomach drop. Compliments before termination, he had seen this pattern before. But the firm is restructuring. Morrison nodded, looking genuinely pained. Economic downturn. We're cutting 15% of staff. It's not about performance or talent. If we had any choice. I understand. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. The handshake was firm. The severance package was reasonable. The recommendation letter would be glowing. None of it changed the fact that Dash was walking out of the building with a cardboard box containing his desk contents and no clear path forward. Rain started as he reached the sidewalk because, of course it did. The universe had a sense of dramatic timing. His apartment in Brooklyn was small enough that Marlo slept in the bedroom, while Dash made do with the pull-out couch. The building was old enough that the radiators clanged like church bells, and the water pressure was a constant gamble, but it was home. It was theirs. The photos of Marlo's kindergarten class covered the refrigerator. Her crayon drawings decorated every available surface, and the space felt warm in a way that Evelyn's penthouse never had, despite costing 100 times more. Dash opened his laptop and faced the numbers that had been haunting him for weeks. Checking account balance, $4,200. Rent due in 3 days, $2,800. Marlo needed dental work for a cavity, $800. Groceries, utilities, subway cards, all the small expenses that added up to survival, roughly $1,000 per month. The severance package gave him 3 months of his salary, $9,000 total. Spreadsheet math said he could survive 4, maybe 5 months if he found work immediately and nothing went wrong. When had anything ever gone right? The walk to Marlo's school gave him 23 minutes to compose himself, to transform the fear and frustration into the smile his daughter deserved to see. PS 321 was a good public school, the kind where teachers actually cared, and the principal knew every child's name. Marlo burst through the doors like a miniature tornado, blonde pigtails flying, backpack nearly as big as she was. "Daddy!" She crashed into his legs hard enough to make him stumble. The hug felt like the only thing in the world that made sense. "Hey, pumpkin, how was school?" She pulled back, green eyes bright with excitement. "We learned about families. Mrs. Patterson said to draw our family tree. Look." The paper she thrust at him showed 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, both with enormous smiling faces and hearts floating around them like balloons. Dash's throat tightened. He knelt down so they were eye level. "It's the most beautiful family tree I've ever seen. We'll put it on the fridge the second we get home." They walked hand in hand through Brooklyn streets that were familiar enough to navigate on autopilot. Marlo chattered about her day, about the book they were reading in class, about how Tommy Hernandez had gotten in trouble for eating paste. Dash listened and made appropriate sounds of surprise and interest, all while his mind churned through possibilities for employment, for money, for any way to keep their small, safe world from collapsing. "Daddy, why don't I have a mommy like Emma does?" The question came out of nowhere, as children's questions often did. Dash stopped walking and knelt again, meeting those innocent eyes that trusted him to have answers for everything. Some families have mommies and daddies. Some have just mommies. Some have just daddies. The important thing is love, not how many people there are. Do you love me? More than anything in the entire universe. Marlo threw her arms around his neck. Then we're the best family. Dash blinked back the tears that would have worried her. The absolute best family in the world. Dinner was spaghetti because pasta was cheap and filling. Dash made Marlo's plate first generous portion with extra sauce the way she liked it. His own plate got half as much. She did not notice the discrepancy, too busy telling him about the science project they would start next week. He watched her eat and felt the fierce protective love that had defined his existence since the day she was born. After she fell asleep after the bedtime story and the lullaby and the careful tucking in of blankets, Dash sat on his couch bed and stared at his laptop screen. His friend Royce had sent a text earlier in the week, one that Dash had been trying to ignore but could no longer afford to dismiss. The message was characteristically blunt. "Bro Fertility Clinic downtown pays $1,200 per donation if you qualify. I know it's weird, but you need money." Dash had typed and deleted responses 4 times before settling on uncertainty. "I don't know, man." Royce's reply had been immediate. "It's not selling yourself, it's helping people who can't have kids. And you need cash for Marlo. Pride doesn't pay rent." The Riverside Fertility website looked medical and professional and deeply uncomfortable. Requirements were listed in bullet points that Dash met without trying: age, height, education, health, no genetic conditions. The application form appeared on his screen like a test he was destined to fail, regardless of the outcome. His cursor hovered over the submit button. Shame washed through him in waves. What kind of father could not even provide basic necessities? What kind of man had to resort to this? But then he looked toward Marlo's bedroom, heard her gentle breathing through the thin wall, and knew the answer. The kind of father who would do anything, sacrifice anything, endure any humiliation to keep his daughter safe and fed and loved. He clicked submit before he could change his mind. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later. "Thank you for your application. Your appointment is scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. The words seemed to burn themselves into his vision. There was no going back now. Tuesday arrived with the inevitability of a dental appointment. Dash wore his only suit, the one from his brother's wedding 4 years ago, that was slightly too tight in the shoulders and showed wear at the cuffs. Marlo was supposed to be with Mrs. Hartley, their neighbor, who watched her sometimes in exchange for Dash fixing things around her apartment. But Mrs. Hartley's grandson had gotten sick, and she had called that morning with profuse apologies and genuine distress, which was how Dash ended up walking into Riverside Fertility Center with a 6-year-old in tow, feeling like an imposter in a world he did not belong to. The clinic screamed expensive in ways both obvious and subtle: marble floors, designer furniture, fresh orchids on every surface. The waiting room held roughly 15 people, all of them dressed like they had walked out of a Nordstrom catalog. Wealthy couples flipped through donor books like they were browsing vacation destinations. Well-groomed women reviewed profiles with the concentration of people making important purchases. Dash approached the reception desk with Marlo's hand in his, feeling every eye in the room tracking his worn suit and secondhand shoes. The receptionist smiled with professional warmth. "Mr. Thorne, please fill out these forms. It will be approximately 30 minutes. He chose a chair in the corner, trying to make himself invisible. Marlo settled beside him with her coloring book and the juice box he had brought from home. Some of the other patients were glancing their way with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. A child in a fertility clinic was apparently unusual. Dash kept his jaw tight and focused on the forms that asked invasive questions about his medical history, his education, his family health, tree going back 3 generations. The door opened with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for movie entrances. Evelyn Thornton did not intend to make a scene. She simply existed in a way that demanded attention. The camel cashmere coat probably cost more than Dash's monthly rent. The Hermes bag was unmistakable, even to someone who knew nothing about designer goods. She wore sunglasses indoors, which should have looked pretentious, but somehow worked, and her posture suggested she had never slouched in her entire life. Whispers rippled through the waiting room. Isn't that Evelyn Thornton, the CEO? What's she doing here? Evelyn ignored the attention with the ease of someone accustomed to being watched. She checked in at the desk, her voice low and professional, then selected a seat on the opposite side of the room. An iPad appeared from her bag, and she began scrolling through what looked like donor profiles with the same focused intensity she might bring to a board meeting. Marlo looked up from her coloring book. Children had no concept of social boundaries, no understanding of when silence was golden. Her stage whisper carried across the entire waiting room. Daddy, why does that lady look so sick? Time stopped. Every head turned. Evelyn's finger froze on her iPad screen. The silence was so complete that the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers suddenly became audible. Dash felt heat flood his face. Marlo, sweetie, that's not polite. But Marlo was not deterred by adult embarrassment. She studied Evelyn with the unfiltered honesty that made 6-year-olds simultaneously charming and mortifying. But she does look sad, like when you're sad but pretend you're not. Evelyn slowly raised her head. Her eyes met Marlo's across the space, and for just a moment the Ice Queen mask cracked. Something vulnerable flickered across her features before being ruthlessly suppressed. But Dash saw it. Everyone saw it. When Evelyn spoke, her voice was quieter than anyone expected. You're a very perceptive young lady. Marlo beamed gap-toothed and completely oblivious to the tension she had created. Thank you, I'm Marlo. That's a funny name, but Daddy says it's special because it's from a writer. The ghost of a smile touched Evelyn's lips. Marlo is a wonderful name. Very literary. Christopher Marlowe was a brilliant playwright. I don't know what that means, but it sounds smart. Dash finally found his voice. I apologize for the interruption. She's very direct. Evelyn's eyes shifted to him, and he felt assessed in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly thorough. Honesty is rare. Don't apologize for it. She returned to her iPad, but Dash noticed she was not actually reading anymore. Her eyes had gone distant, focused on something internal rather than the screen in front of her. Marlo went back to her coloring, humming tunelessly, the moment already forgotten, in the way children forgot things that adults would replay for years. The crayon rolled off Marlo's lap and across the floor with the determination of an object obeying Murphy's Law. It came to rest directly beside Evelyn's Louboutin heel, red sole unmistakable, probably worth more than Dash's entire shoe collection. Marlo hopped up immediately, manners overriding shyness. Excuse me, miss. Evelyn looked down at the small blonde girl suddenly standing beside her arm. Something in her expression shifted, softened in a way that suggested she was not accustomed to children, but was not entirely immune to their charm. She picked up the crayon and offered it with the kind of careful courtesy usually reserved for adults. Here you go. Marlo took it, and then, because she was 6 and had not yet learned to filter compliments, blurted out her thoughts. You have really pretty hair, like a princess. The smile that crossed Evelyn's face was genuine and gone, almost before it appeared. Thank you, Marlo. Your hair is beautiful too. That color is lovely. Marlo ran back to Dash, her whisper still loud enough for half the room to hear. Daddy, she's nice and so pretty. Dash felt his embarrassment reach new heights. Marlo, inside voice. But Evelyn was watching them now with an expression Dash could not quite read. Interest maybe, curiosity, something that looked almost like longing. Marlo settled back into her coloring, but kept up a steady stream of chatter that Dash had learned to only half monitor. She talked about school, about her favorite teacher, about the project they were doing on animals. Then inevitably her curiosity turned to their current location. Daddy, why are we at this doctor? Dash struggled for age-appropriate explanation. Daddy is helping people who want to have babies but need some assistance. Like helping them make a baby. Something like that, yeah. Marlo considered this with the seriousness she brought to all new information. Oh, like when you helped Mrs. Hartley fix her broken sink. Despite the stress and awkwardness of the situation, Dash had to suppress a laugh. Kind of like that pumpkin. Yeah. Evelyn had gone very still. She was not looking at her iPad anymore. Her attention was entirely on the conversation happening across the room, and Dash realized she was listening to every word. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly, but not before he caught something in her expression, calculation mixed with something that might have been hope. The nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Thorne, we're ready for you." Dash stood, lifting Marlowe into his arms. The nurse's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry. Children can't come into the examination areas." Panic must have shown on his face. He had no backup plan, no one to call, no way to leave Marlowe alone in a waiting room full of strangers. His mind raced through impossibilities, trying to find a solution that did not exist. Evelyn heard herself speak before she fully understood what she was doing. "I can watch her, if that's acceptable." The entire waiting room seemed to inhale simultaneously. Dash stared at her like she had spoken in a foreign language. The nurse looked equally surprised. Evelyn felt as shocked as anyone by the words that had just come out of her mouth, but she did not take them back. Dash hesitated, every protective instinct warring with desperate necessity. "I couldn't ask you to." "You didn't ask, I offered. I'm simply sitting here reading. It's no imposition." Marlowe was already wiggling down from her father's arms, clearly delighted by this turn of events. "Can I, Daddy, please, she's really nice." Dash looked between his daughter and this stranger who had just volunteered to watch her. Evelyn met his eyes and tried to project trustworthiness, competence, safety, all the things she had spent her career convincing boardrooms she possessed. Finally, he nodded. "Just 15 minutes. Please be on your very best behavior, Marlowe." "I will, I promise." The nurse led Dash away, and suddenly Evelyn was alone with a 6-year-old who looked at her with complete trust and zero fear. The silence stretched for approximately 5 seconds before Marlowe filled it with the enthusiasm of someone who had never met an awkward pause. "I'm 6 3/4. I like unicorns and also dinosaurs." "Do you like dinosaurs?" Evelyn realized she had not actually thought about dinosaurs in roughly 3 decades. "I haven't considered them recently." "You should. They're really cool, except they're all dead now. That's sad." Marlowe pulled her coloring book onto her lap and flipped through pages. "This is my family. See, that's Daddy, and that's me. We have big smiles because we're happy." The drawing was typical child art stick figures with circles for heads and triangles for bodies. But the smiles were indeed enormous, and little hearts floated around both figures like confetti. Evelyn stared at it longer than was probably normal. "Where's your mother?" The question came out before Evelyn could stop it, before she remembered that asking children about absent parents was potentially traumatic. But Marlowe seemed entirely unbothered. "She left when I was little. Daddy says she needed to find herself." "Have you found yourself?" The philosophical depth of the question from a 6-year-old caught Evelyn completely off guard. I, I don't know if I was ever lost." Marlowe tilted her head like a small bird examining a curious object. "Maybe you should look anyway. Sometimes things are lost, and you don't even know it." Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had not known existed suddenly developing fissures. This child, with her gap-toothed smile and her crayon drawings and her absolute lack of guile, had somehow seen through decades of careful construction in under 5 minutes. The observation was devastating in its innocent accuracy. Before Evelyn could formulate a response, Marlowe had moved on to showing her different drawings: a rainbow, a house, what might have been a donk or possibly a horse. Each one came with detailed explanation delivered in the kind of run-on sentences that children used before they learned about punctuation. Evelyn listened and made appropriate sounds of interest and felt something unfamiliar stirring in the hollow space where her emotions were supposed to live. Dash returned exactly 15 minutes later, looking simultaneously relieved and anxious. "Thank you so much. I hope she wasn't any trouble." Evelyn stood smoothing her coat with hands that trembled slightly. "Not at all. She's delightful." Marlowe launched herself at Evelyn's legs in a hug that was over before Evelyn could react. "Bye, Princess Lady. I hope you find what's lost and get happy." The words hit harder than they should have. Evelyn's vision blurred slightly, and she turned away quickly before anyone could see the moisture gathering in her eyes. "Goodbye, Marlowe. Thank you for keeping me company." She watched them leave through the clinic doors, Dash holding his daughter's hand, Marlowe skipping and chattering, the two of them a complete unit that needed nothing and no one else to be whole. Something in that image broke through Evelyn's last defenses. She opened her iPad not to return to donor profiles, but to search for something different. Dashiell Thorne, architect, Brooklyn. The LinkedIn profile appeared immediately. Morrison and Associates, though the date showed his employment had recently ended. Awards and accolades proved he was talented. Education credentials from CCNY showed he was educated. But none of that mattered as much as what Evelyn had just witnessed: the way he talked to his daughter, the way Marlowe looked at him with complete trust and unquestioning love, the way they formed a family of two that was more complete than most families of four. The decision crystallized with the kind of clarity Evelyn usually reserved for business deals. She needed more information. She needed to know if what she had seen was real or performance. She needed to understand if this man was actually as good a father as he appeared to be, or if that 15-minute interaction had been an elaborate act. Her fingers moved across the screen, pulling up a contact she had used exactly twice before for extremely delicate matters. Thomas Webb, Private Investigations, former NYPD detective now available for hire by people who could afford discretion. The email she composed was brief and professional. Mr. Webb, I require comprehensive background check and 4 weeks of observational surveillance on the attached subject. Weekly reports. Complete discretion essential. Please confirm acceptance and rates at your earliest convenience. She attached Dashiell Thorne's information and sent the email before she could second-guess the insanity of what she was doing. The response came back in under 10 minutes. Ms. Thornton, happy to assist. $200 hour plus expenses. Begin immediately upon your approval. Evelyn typed one word: approved. Webb's first email arrived 3 days later, marked urgent and encrypted. Evelyn opened it in her office with the door locked, feeling like a spy engaging in corporate espionage rather than a woman trying to make the most important decision of her life. The background check was thorough to the point of invasion. Dashiell Alexander Thorne, age 32, born and raised in Queens. Father worked construction until his death from heart attack when Dash was 19. Mother still alive, working as a nurse, remarried to a decent man who ran a small plumbing business. Brother in New Jersey, married with twins. Education history showed excellence, full scholarship to CCNY for architecture based on merit. Graduated summa cum laude. Hired by Morrison and Associates straight out of school. Had won Young Architect of the Year in 2023 for an innovative, affordable housing design. Recently laid off due to firm downsizing, not performance issues. Marriage to Amanda Whitfield at age 26, divorced at 30. The custody arrangement made Evelyn's heart clench. Amanda had voluntarily relinquished all parental rights, citing inability to connect with the child and desire to pursue her own life without the burden of motherhood. Dash had full custody. Amanda had not visited Marlowe once in 2 years. No child support, no contact, nothing. Financial situation was exactly as dire as Evelyn had suspected. Checking account balance of $12,000, the severance package plus his savings. No investments, no trust fund, no safety net beyond his own ability to find work. The man was one major emergency away from complete financial collapse. Criminal record was non-existent, not even a speeding ticket. References from former employers, colleagues, and professors all painted the same picture: talented, reliable, decent kind. Webb's preliminary assessment was brief but telling. Subject appears to be exactly what he presents: good man in difficult circumstances. Recommend continued surveillance for behavioral verification. The second week's report came with video files that Evelyn watched alone in her penthouse at midnight, unable to sleep, unable to stop herself. Webb had followed Dash and Marlowe through their daily routine with the dedication of someone who understood that patterns revealed truth more clearly than individual moments. Morning footage showed Dash making breakfast, actual cooking, not grabbing fast food or pouring cereal. Pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse scrambled eggs, orange slices arranged in a smile on the plate. Marlowe chattering while he worked, him listening and responding and clearly enjoying the conversation despite the early hour. The walk to school was filmed from a distance. Dash held Marlowe's hand the entire way, never checking his phone, never distracted. They talked constantly, his head bent down to hear her better, her animated gestures suggesting she was telling a story that required full-body illustration. Afternoon pickup showed the same pattern. Every day, 3:30 exactly, Dash was at the school gates. Weather did not matter. Rain, cold, brutal heat, he was there. And every day, Marlowe's face lit up like someone had turned on a switch when she saw him. The playground footage was what undid Evelyn completely. Marlowe attempting to climb the monkey bars, struggling, starting to fall. Webb's camera caught Dash's reaction in perfect detail, the instinct to run forward checked after 2 steps. He stopped himself, stayed back, watched his daughter catch herself and recover. When she made it across successfully, he was there with praise and a high five, but he had given her space to succeed or fail on her own. The video file name was timestamp labeled Subject Teaching Resilience, Not Helicopter Parenting. Evelyn watched that clip 7 times. She had never known this kind of parenting existed. Catherine would have prevented the fall, then punished the attempt. This man let his daughter try, let her risk, let her be brave. The difference felt cosmic. Week 3 brought community interviews that painted a consistent portrait. Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, the elderly neighbor, spoke with the kind of warmth usually reserved for beloved family members. Dash is the son I wish I'd had. Helps me with everything, broken pipes, electrical problems, heavy lifting. Never asked for money. When my grandson got sick and I needed to get to the hospital at 2 in the morning, Dash drove us without hesitation. Marlowe was sick herself that week, but he bundled her up and came anyway because he knew I was scared. Marlowe's teacher provided insight into the child's well-being. She's one of the happiest, most well-adjusted students I've taught in 15 years. Confident but kind. Curious without being disruptive. Mr. Thorne comes to every parent-teacher conference, asks thoughtful questions about her development, volunteers for field trips, even though I know his work schedule is tight. Quality single parent doesn't begin to cover it. Royce Barrett, the friend who had suggested the fertility clinic donation, was blunt in the way that men were when they trusted their words would not be twisted. Dash is the best man I know. Period. When his wife bailed, I thought he might fall apart. Instead, he stepped up in ways I didn't know were possible. Works his ass off for Marlowe. Never complains. Never asks for help, even when he needs it. If you're vetting him for something, whatever it is, he's qualified. Even Marlowe's pediatrician had nothing but praise. Mr. Thorne is an exceptionally attentive parent. Never misses well-child visits. Asks informed questions. Follows through on recommendations. Marlowe is healthy, happy, properly cared for. Some single parents struggle with the workload. He excels at it. Webb's assessment grew more confident with each report. Subject has strong community support and is universally well regarded. No red flags. Behavioral patterns consistent with devoted single father prioritizing child's needs over own comfort. The 4th week's report came with a video file that Webb had labeled Critical Review Immediately. Evelyn opened it with hands that shook slightly, wondering what could possibly qualify as critical after 3 weeks of glowing reviews. The footage was from a grocery store security camera, grainy but clear enough. Dash and Marlowe in the cookie aisle. The audio barely picked up their conversation, but Evelyn could read body language well enough to understand the exchange. Marlowe pointing at cookies asking. Dash pausing, checking his wallet, doing visible mental mathematics. The hesitation lasted roughly 10 seconds. Then he said yes. Marlowe's joy was obvious even on the security footage. But what happened next made Evelyn's chest constrict. Dash walked back to a previous aisle, the camera angle shifted to follow, and returned a sandwich to the shelf. The price difference was minimal, maybe $3, but it was enough. He had chosen his daughter's happiness over his own lunch. The timestamp showed this was from a Saturday afternoon. Webb's notes indicated Dash had not eaten anything else that day based on observation. He had given Marlowe cookies and gone hungry himself, and he had done it with a smile that suggested it was not even a sacrifice worth mentioning. Evelyn watched the video on repeat, counting the number of times she viewed it somewhere around 12 before losing track. She sat in her penthouse office, surrounded by luxury that could have purchased that entire grocery store, and cried for the first time in 26 years. Not sad tears, something else entirely. Something like recognition that this kind of love existed, that people could be this selfless, that she wanted exactly this for her child. Webb's final assessment was unequivocal. Subject is exemplary father. Sacrifices personal needs for child's well-being without resentment. Maintains positive attitude despite significant financial stress. Daughter is thriving under his care. If client's intention is to evaluate subject as potential father figure, he exceeds all reasonable standards. Recommend proceeding with whatever plan you have in mind. This is the real deal. Evelyn picked up her phone and dialed Webb's number directly. He answered on the second ring. Webb, I need his phone number. Personal cell if you have it. There was a pause. Miss Thornton, what exactly are you planning? To ask him something that will sound completely insane and hope he doesn't immediately hang up. This is about co-parenting, isn't it? Evelyn was surprised enough to be honest. How did you know? 30 years as a detective teaches you to read between lines. You're looking for a father for your future child, and you just spent 4 weeks confirming what you knew in your gut after watching him for 15 minutes in that clinic. Am I close? Disturbingly close. Webb's chuckle was warm. For what it's worth, if I had a daughter looking for a co-parent, I'd approve of this guy. Sending you his contact information now. Good luck, Miss Thornton. Something tells me you are about to need it. The text message arrived with Dashiell Thorne's phone number. Evelyn stared at it for 10 minutes, composing and deleting messages in her head. Everything she tried sounded either too formal or too casual, too presumptuous or too vague. How did one approach a complete stranger with a proposition to co-parent a child that did not yet exist? What words made that sound rational instead of deranged? Finally, she typed the simplest version she could manage. Mr. Thorne, this is Evelyn Thornton from Riverside Clinic. I have a proposition that will sound insane. Will you meet me to discuss, Her finger hovered over send. This was the moment of no return. Once she sent this message, there was no pretending she had not crossed a line from eccentric to potentially unhinged. But the alternative was returning to donor catalogs, to surrogates, to raising a child alone while being haunted by the knowledge that something better existed. She thought of Marlowe's gap-toothed smile. She thought of Dash sacrificing his lunch for cookies. She thought of her own childhood locked in rooms to learn strength and knew with absolute certainty that she wanted the exact opposite for her child. Evelyn pressed send before courage failed her. The response came 30 seconds later, and it was not what she expected. Who is this, and how did you get this number? She had forgotten that normal people did not expect random texts from billionaires they had met once in a waiting room. Evelyn typed quickly, trying to sound less like a stalker. The woman whose daughter your child spoke to at the fertility center. We met briefly. I apologize for the unexpected contact. I have something important to discuss. May I buy you coffee? The 3 dots indicating typing appeared and disappeared 4 times. Evelyn's heart raced in a way it never did during board meetings or merger negotiations. This felt infinitely more important and infinitely more terrifying. Finally, his response came through. This is extremely weird, but I'm curious enough to say yes. When and where Evelyn surprised herself by suggesting Brooklyn rather than Manhattan. Rosie's Diner, Court Street. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. That works. How will I know it's not some kind of elaborate scam? Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. I'll be the overdressed woman who looks completely out of place. You'll recognize me. His response was a single word. Okay. Evelyn set down her phone and stared out at the Manhattan skyline. She had just set in motion something that could not be undone, had just invited a complete stranger into her life, based on 4 weeks of surveillance and a gut feeling that went against every logical bone in her body. Catherine would call this insanity. The board would call it liability. Her lawyers would call it legal suicide. But Evelyn thought of Marlowe's drawing 2 stick figures with enormous smiles and hearts floating everywhere, and thought maybe, just maybe, this was the sanest thing she had ever done. Rosie's Diner smelled like coffee that had been brewing since the Reagan administration, and pie that somehow made the stale air worthwhile. Evelyn arrived 15 minutes early because punctuality was the only form of control she could exercise over a situation that had already spiraled beyond any reasonable boundary. The red vinyl booths were cracked, the linoleum floor showed decades of foot traffic, and every surface had the worn patina of a place that had survived through authenticity rather than renovation. She chose a corner booth and immediately felt conspicuous. The Max Mara coat screamed money in a room where most patrons wore Carhartt jackets and work boots. A waitress approached with the kind of friendly skepticism reserved for obvious tourists in local establishments. Coffee, hon. Evelyn nodded, grateful for something to do with her hands. The mug that arrived was thick ceramic chipped along the rim, filled with coffee that was surprisingly decent. She wrapped both hands around it and tried to remember the last time she had sat in a diner, college maybe, before Catherine had systematically eliminated every aspect of her life that did not align with Thornton standards. Dash arrived exactly at 2, and Evelyn realized with surprise that punctuality was something they shared. He still wore the suit from the clinic, though he had loosened the tie and there was wariness in his eyes that suggested he had spent the past 24 hours questioning his sanity. Marlo was not with him, which was both relief and disappointment. He slid into the booth across from her and got straight to the point. "So, what's this about?" Evelyn had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. Every version had sounded deranged in her head, and now that the moment had arrived, the carefully constructed speeches evaporated completely. She settled for brutal honesty instead. "I have a medical condition that makes natural conception extremely unlikely. I'm exploring alternative options for having a child. I want to ask you something that will probably make you leave immediately, but I'm going to ask anyway because I've spent 4 weeks confirming that you're exactly who you appear to be." Dash's expression shifted from wariness to confusion. "4 weeks? What are you talking about?" "I hired a private investigator to observe you. I know that sounds invasive and possibly illegal, and I apologize for the violation of your privacy, but I needed to know if you were genuinely the kind of father you appeared to be in that 15-minute interaction, or if it was performance." The color rose in his face, not embarrassment but anger. His voice came out low and controlled. "You had me followed. You spied on my daughter." "Not spied, observed. There's a difference." "There really isn't." He started to stand, and Evelyn felt the opportunity slipping away like water through cupped hands. Her words tumbled out in a rush that was entirely unlike her usual measured speech. "I watched you give up your lunch so Marlo could have cookies. I watched you teach her to be brave on the playground by letting her risk falling. I watched you walk her to school every single day, regardless of weather. I saw every neighbor and teacher and friend describe you as the best man they know. And I want that for my child, not a catalog donor, not artificial insemination from a stranger. A real father who knows how to love unconditionally. Someone like you." Dash sank back into the booth, not because he had decided to stay, but because the words had apparently rendered him incapable of standing. "Are you asking me to be a sperm donor? I'm asking if you would consider co-parenting with me. Shared custody, shared decisions, shared responsibility for raising a child together without romantic involvement. It's called intentional co-parenting, and it's more common than you'd think." The waitress reappeared with coffee for Dash in a subtle exit strategy. "You folks need a minute." He nodded without taking his eyes off Evelyn. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was thinking through implications faster than most people could process a restaurant menu. "You're serious. Completely. You want to have a baby with a stranger. I want to have a baby with someone who already understands what it means to be a parent. Someone who won't use me for money. Someone who will love our child the way you love Marlo." She paused, then added the truth that felt like exposing a wound. "I don't know how to love, Mr. Thorne. My mother made sure of that. But I saw you with your daughter, and I thought maybe I could learn." Dash ran both hands through his hair, a gesture that suggested he was trying to physically reorganize his thoughts. "This is insane. You realize that, right?" "Yes." "You're a billionaire. You could have anyone anything. Why would you possibly want this arrangement with someone like me? Because everyone else wants something from me. You're the first person I've met in years who looked at me like I was just another person in a waiting room. Not an opportunity, not a transaction, just someone who happened to be there." He studied her with an intensity that made Evelyn want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. She had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of projecting confidence she did not feel. This moment required every ounce of that skill. "What's in it for me?" The question came out blunt, almost aggressive. "You said you'd cover expenses, but that sounds like charity. I don't take handouts." "It's not charity, it's investment in our child's well-being. You provide love and stability and everything I don't know how to give. I provide financial security and resources and everything you are currently struggling to maintain alone. We each bring what the other lacks. And if we can't stand each other, then we're no worse off than millions of divorced parents who manage to co-parent successfully despite mutual dislike. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, dropping some of the formal armor. I'm not asking you to love me, Mr. Thorne. I'm asking if you'd be willing to love a child we create together. If you'd let me learn how to do the same by watching you. Dash picked up his coffee mug, but did not drink from it, just held it like an anchor to reality. I need time to think about this. It's a lot. Of course, take whatever time you need. Evelyn pulled a business card from her bag and slid it across the table. My personal cell is on there. Call when you are ready to talk again. Or don't call if you decide this is too much. I'll understand either way. She stood to leave, gathering her coat with hands that betrayed her nerves through their slight tremor. Dash noticed, and something in his expression softened marginally. Miss Thornton, for what it's worth, I don't think you're as incapable of love as you believe you are. Anyone who would go through this much effort to find the right person to help raise their child clearly cares deeply about doing it right. The observation hit harder than any business critique Evelyn had ever received. She managed a small nod and left before emotion could compromise the composure she had barely maintained throughout the conversation. The call came 3 days later at 11 p.m. Evelyn was reviewing quarterly reports when her personal phone buzzed with an unknown number that she somehow knew belonged to Dash before answering. I talked to Marlo about it, not the specifics, but the concept of her maybe having a sibling someday. She was more excited than I expected. That got me thinking. Evelyn set down the financial documents and gave him her full attention. Thinking what? That maybe this is crazy enough to actually work. I have conditions, though. We'll name them. I want legal documentation of everything. Custody arrangements, financial responsibilities, medical decisions. I want my parental rights protected in writing before we do anything. Agreed, Antaine. I'll have my attorney draft a contract this week. And I don't want charity disguised as child support. If you're covering expenses, I need it structured in a way that doesn't feel like you're my employer. We can work out fair terms. Evelyn paused, then ventured into territory she had not planned to discuss yet. Would you be comfortable meeting regularly, getting to know each other before we commit to this? Like dating, but without the dating part. Essentially, yes. If we're going to raise a child together, we should probably confirm we can tolerate each other for extended periods. His laugh was unexpected, warm and genuine. That's probably the most practical approach to this impractical idea. Okay, let's try it. But if at any point either of us wants out, we walk away. No hard feelings, no obligations. Agreed. They arranged to meet twice a week, once for practical discussions about logistics and expectations, once with Marlo present to observe how they interacted as a potential family unit. The structure felt safer than the emotional chaos Evelyn experienced whenever she thought about what she was actually attempting to do. The law office of Jessica Park occupied the 23rd floor of a building in Midtown that specialized in family law for clients who could afford discretion. Jessica herself was 45, sharp-eyed and skeptical in the way good attorneys needed to be. Let me make sure I understand correctly. She reviewed her notes with the careful precision of someone translating a foreign language. You want a co-parenting agreement with someone you've known for less than 2 weeks. Shared custody equal decision-making authority in financial terms that protect both parties in the event of dispute. Evelyn sat with perfect posture in the client chair. That's correct. Dash beside her looked less comfortable with the formality, but equally committed. We want everything legal and clear from the start. No ambiguity. Jessica turned her attention to him with an expression that suggested she was evaluating his motives with professional suspicion. Mr. Thorne, you understand this gives you equal legal rights to a child who will be genetically related to Miss Thornton. That's unusual. Must co-parenting arrangements involve both parties contributing genetic material? I understand. We've discussed it. And you're comfortable with the power dynamics here. Miss Thornton has significantly more financial resources. That creates inherent imbalance. Dash's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. That's why we're doing this properly, with contracts and legal protections. So neither of us can use money or genetics as leverage. Jessica seemed satisfied by the response. She spent the next hour walking them through scenarios that felt increasingly like preparing for a business merger, rather than creating a family. What happened if one of them wanted to relocate? What if they disagreed on medical treatment? What about education decisions, religious upbringing, holiday schedules? Each question revealed new layers of complexity they had not considered. Evelyn found herself grateful for the legal structure, even as she chafed against the coldness of reducing parenthood to contractual clauses. Dash asked thoughtful questions that suggested he had spent considerable time thinking through potential complications. The genetic compatibility testing happened at a private medical facility that catered to clients who valued anonymity. A cheerful technician collected DNA samples with the efficiency of someone who had seen stranger situations than intentional co-parents verifying genetic diversity. Results came back 3 days later. Genetically, they were compatible. No shared recessive conditions, no concerning overlaps. The baby would be healthy, assuming everything else proceeded according to plan. Sitting in the clinic waiting for results felt surreal. Evelyn and Dash in adjacent chairs reading magazines, neither of them processed, both acutely aware they were taking steps towards something irrevocable. When the doctor confirmed compatibility, relief mixed with terror in approximately equal measure. Dr. Hammond's office was designed to put people at ease, which was probably why it made Evelyn deeply uncomfortable. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, abstract art on walls, all of it screamed therapy in a way that made her want to run. The psychological evaluation was non-negotiable, according to Jessica, who insisted that co-parents needed professional assessment of their ability to work together. Dr. Hammond was 50-ish, with graying hair and the kind eyes of someone who had heard every human dysfunction imaginable and remained compassionate anyway. She directed them to a couch that forced proximity without demanding an intimacy. "Tell me why you're pursuing this arrangement." Evelyn delivered the practical explanation she had prepared: medical conditions desire for involved co-parent mutual benefit. Dr. Hammond listened without judgment and then pivoted to Dash. "And you, Mr. Thorne, what motivates your participation?" He took longer to answer, seeming to weigh honesty against social acceptability. "Financial security for my daughter is part of it. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. But mostly I think Marlo would benefit from having a sibling. And I believe I can be a good father to another child." "What happens if you develop romantic feelings for each other?" The question landed between them like a grenade. Evelyn's response was immediate. "We won't." Dr. Hammond's eyebrow raised slightly. "You sound very certain." "I'm not capable of that kind of attachment. It was trained out of me." Trained out? Evelyn regretted the phrasing immediately. Admitting weakness was not her style, but something about Dr. Hammond's patient silence pulled confession from her like poison from a wound. "My mother believed emotional attachment was weakness. She took steps to ensure I understood that." "What kind of steps?" The memory surfaced despite Evelyn's attempt to suppress it. "When I was 8, I found a stray kitten. I hid it in my room for 3 days. My mother discovered it and made me put it outside in the rain. When I cried, she locked me in my room for 24 hours to teach me that tears were unacceptable." The room went very quiet. Hammond's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been anger or sadness or both. Dash had gone completely still beside Evelyn. His voice came out rough. "That's child abuse." Evelyn felt defensive instinct flare. "She was teaching me strength." "No, she was teaching you to suppress normal human emotion. There's a difference." He turned to Dr. Hammond as if needing confirmation from an authority figure. "That's abuse, right?" "It's certainly emotionally harmful parenting." Dr. Hammond made a note on her pad, then returned attention to Evelyn with visible care. "Do you still have contact with your mother?" "She's very involved in my life." "And how do you feel about that involvement?" Evelyn wanted to deflect, to change subjects, to do anything other than admit the truth. But Dash was watching her with something that looked like concern rather than judgment, and the combination of his presence and Dr. Hammond's patient attention broke through defenses she had maintained for decades. "Trapped. I feel trapped." Dr. Hammond nodded slowly. "That's an important recognition, Miss Thornton. We'll need to address that before you bring a child into the situation. But for now, let's move to practical matters. How do you both handle conflict?" The session continued for 90 minutes, excavating dynamics and patterns that neither Evelyn nor Dash had fully considered. Toward the end, Dr. Hammond posed a scenario that created the first real argument between them. "What happens if one of you wants to relocate for career opportunities?" Evelyn's response was automatic. The contract prohibits relocation outside New York City without mutual consent. Dash's head whipped toward her. Wait, what? It's in Section 7 of the draft contract. I thought you reviewed it. I reviewed the major points. That detail must have been buried in subsections. His voice had an edge that Evelyn had not heard before. You can't just decide unilaterally that neither of us can ever leave the city. I'm not deciding unilaterally. The contract protects both of us from the other person moving away with the child. No, it protects you from me moving, because you have the resources to stay in New York no matter what. I might get a job offer elsewhere. I might need to relocate for work. You're essentially trapping me here through legal language. Evelyn felt her own anger rising to match his. That's not my intention. But it's the effect. This is exactly what I was worried about, you using money and lawyers to control everything. Butter Hammond intervened before the argument escalated further. This is actually very productive. You've just discovered a major point of contention. How do you want to resolve it? They stared at each other across the coffee table, both breathing harder than the physical situation warranted. Evelyn recognized the feeling from board meetings where negotiations went badly, the need to win, to maintain control, to prove she was right. But this was not a business deal. This was the foundation of a family, and winning meant Dash walking away. She forced herself to concede ground. You're right. That clause is too restrictive. We should revise it. His surprise was visible. Really? Really, I'm used to controlling every variable, but you're correct that it's unfair in this situation. We'll find language that protects the child's stability without eliminating your career flexibility. Dr. Hammond smiled slightly. That's excellent conflict resolution. You both prioritize the relationship over being right. That's crucial for successful co-parenting. The session ended with homework. They were supposed to spend time together in low-stress environments, observe how they naturally interacted, identify potential friction points before they became actual problems. As they left the office, Dash caught Evelyn's arm gently. Thank you for backing down on that contract thing. I know it wasn't easy for you. Thank you for calling me out on it. I needed to hear that I was being controlling. They stood in the hallway and something shifted between them. Recognition that they were both trying, both capable of adjusting, both committed enough to work through difficulty rather than abandon ship at the first sign of trouble. The zoo trip was Marlowe's idea, proposed with the enthusiasm only 6-year-olds could muster. Evelyn agreed before fully considering the implications of spending an entire Saturday surrounded by children crowds and animal smells. Dash picked her up in his aging Honda Civic that had a cracked dashboard and a back seat covered in Marlowe's artwork and snack wrappers. The contrast to Evelyn's Tesla was stark enough to be almost comedic. Marlowe bounced in her booster seat. Miss Evelyn, are you excited to see the elephants? Evelyn, who had not been to a zoo since a school field trip 30 years ago, manufactured enthusiasm. Very excited. They're my favorites. Well, elephants and penguins. And maybe giraffes, and definitely the red pandas. The Bronx Zoo was packed with families enjoying early autumn weather. Children ran in packs, strollers clogged pathways, and everywhere Evelyn looked there were parents engaged in the kind of casual chaos that seemed equal parts exhausting and joyful. She felt like an anthropologist observing an alien culture. Marlowe grabbed her hand without asking permission and pulled her toward the elephant enclosure with single-minded determination. The casual touch sent an unexpected jolt through Evelyn. When was the last time someone had held her hand? Dash followed behind, carrying a backpack full of snacks and water bottles and the other supplies required for a day with a 6-year-old. Look, that's Patty. She's the oldest one. Marlowe pressed against the railing, pointing at an elephant whose ears flapped lazily. Did you know elephants never forget anything? Like they remember people, even after years and years. Evelyn watched the elephants and felt something uncomfortable stirring in her chest. Marlowe's hand was still clasped in hers, small and trusting, and there was something about the weight of that small palm that made Evelyn's eyes sting. Do you like animals, Miss Evelyn? The question should have been simple. It was not. Catherine's voice echoed in her head. Thornton women don't waste sentiment on animals. Liking things was weakness. But Marlowe was looking up at her with those green eyes full of hope and curiosity, and Evelyn found herself being honest in a way that felt dangerous. I think I do. I've never really given myself permission to find out. Marlo processed this with the seriousness she brought to all confusing adult statements. That's sad. You should find out. Trying things is how you learn about yourself. Dash had moved closer ostensibly to see the elephants better, but Evelyn suspected he was monitoring the interaction with protective instinct. She could not blame him. She was a stranger holding his daughter's hand, an unknown quantity who might still turn out to be a terrible influence. They moved through the zoo slowly at Marlowe pace, which meant stopping at every exhibit for extended observation and commentary. At the penguin house, Marlowe provided detailed backstories for each bird. At the monkey enclosure, she did impressions that made other children laugh. At the butterfly pavilion, she stood completely still while a monarch landed on her shoulder, and her face radiated wonder so pure that Evelyn had to look away. "You're doing great." Dash's voice was quiet, meant only for her. They had fallen slightly behind while Marlowe raced ahead to the next exhibit. "I'm not doing anything, just following her around. That's more than you think. You're present. You're engaged. You're letting her be herself without trying to correct or improve her. That matters." Evelyn wanted to dismiss the compliment, but found she could not. "I don't know how to do this. I keep worrying I'm going to say something wrong and damage her somehow." Kids are more resilient than you think. And honestly, the fact that you're worried about it means you're already doing better than parents who don't question themselves at all. They caught up to Marlowe at the gift shop, where she pressed her nose against the glass like a puppy in a pet store window. The stuffed animals inside represented every species in the zoo, priced reasonably for families on budgets. Marlowe pointed at a plush elephant. "That one looks like Patty." Dash glanced at the price tag, $15, and Evelyn saw the mental calculation happen. He had brought cash for food and maybe one small souvenir, but $15 was significant money for a family operating on severance payments. Before she could overthink it, Evelyn spoke. "Which one did you like best, Marlowe?" "The elephant. But it's okay if we don't get it. Daddy says we're saving money for important things." "What if I got it for you as a thank you for being such an excellent tour guide today?" Marlowe's eyes went wide. "Really?" Dash looked uncomfortable. "Miss Thornton, you don't have to." "I want to, please." She met his eyes and tried to communicate something she could not articulate in front of Marlowe. "Let me do this. Let me participate in making her happy. Let me learn how this works." He hesitated, then nodded. Evelyn purchased the elephant and handed it to Marlowe, whose squeal of delight drew smiles from other shoppers. The little girl hugged the stuffed animal fiercely, then threw her arms around Evelyn's waist. "Thank you, Miss Evelyn. I'm naming her Ella." The hug lasted 3 seconds but felt infinite. Evelyn's arms came up awkwardly to return the embrace, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. Some wall she had built so carefully over decades, suddenly developing fissures. When Marlowe pulled away, Evelyn had to turn toward the merchandise display and blink rapidly to clear her vision. Dash's hand touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of understanding and maybe approval. Neither of them said anything, but the moment marked a shift. They were not strangers anymore. They were not quite friends. But they were becoming something that might eventually resemble a team. The cooking disaster happened a week later. Dash had invited Evelyn to his apartment for dinner, insisting she needed to see how they actually lived, rather than just meeting in neutral public spaces. The invitation felt simultaneously intimate and terrifying. The apartment was exactly what Evelyn expected small, cluttered, lived in. Toys occupied every surface, artwork covered the refrigerator. In layers, furniture was mismatched but functional. It smelled like old building and someone's earlier cooking, plus something sweet that might have been air freshener, or maybe just Marlowe's shampoo. The space was probably a fifth the size of Evelyn's walk-in closet. It was also the warmest place she had been in years. Marlowe gave her the grand tour with the pride of someone showing off a mansion. "This is Daddy's room, but it's really the living room because I get the bedroom. That's the kitchen. The bathroom is tiny, but it works, and that's my art corner." The art corner consisted of a child-sized table covered in supplies and several completed masterpieces taped to the wall. Evelyn studied each one with genuine interest, noting the progression in skill level and the common themes of family happiness and hearts. Dinner was supposed to be simple spaghetti with homemade sauce, garlic bread salad. Dash insisted on cooking everything from scratch because that was both cheaper and healthier than alternatives. Marlowe was assigned sous chef duties, which she took seriously despite being barely tall enough to reach the counter on her step stool. Miss Evelyn, you can help too. You can cut the tomatoes. Evelyn accepted the knife like it might explode. Her cooking experience was limited to reheating takeout and operating an espresso machine. Actually preparing food from raw ingredients was territory she had not explored since a mandatory home economics class in middle school. Marlowe offered instructions with the confidence of someone who did this regularly. You cut them in chunks, not too small. We want tomato-sized pieces. The resulting chunks were uneven, but Marlowe praised them anyway. Dash worked at the stove, managing 3 pots simultaneously while answering Marlowe's constant questions and somehow making everything look easier than it was. Evelyn felt useless and out of place, overdressed in cashmere, among people wearing jeans and old t-shirts, wielding a knife like a surgical instrument, among people for whom cooking was daily routine. The juice incident happened during sauce preparation. Marlowe was pouring herself apple juice from a container too large for her hands. Evelyn saw the disaster unfolding in slow motion, but did not react fast enough. The container tipped, sending juice across the counter and directly onto Evelyn's cashmere sweater. Cold liquid soaked through expensive fabric immediately. Marlowe froze juice container, still in hand, face crumpling in horror. Dash spun from the stove, taking in the situation, and Evelyn saw him brace for her reaction. Every instinct screamed to express frustration. The sweater was $400. The juice was sticky and would probably stain. This was exactly the kind of chaotic mess that Catherine had trained out of her. Thornton women did not tolerate carelessness. Punishment for spills was swift and memorable. But Marlowe's face stopped her cold. The little girl looked terrified, anticipating yelling or anger or rejection. And Evelyn realized with sudden clarity that her reaction right now would determine whether Marlowe ever trusted her. This was a test she had not known she was taking. She knelt down to eye level, all ignoring the juice dripping onto the floor. "Hey, sweetie, it's okay. Accidents happen to everyone." Marlowe's voice was tiny. "You're not mad. Not even a little bit. It's just a shirt. Shirts can be washed." The relief on Marlowe's face was so profound that Evelyn felt something break inside her. This child had been afraid of her, anger had expected punishment, and Evelyn's choice to offer kindness instead was visibly revolutionary. She opened her arms and Marlowe crashed into them, still clutching the juice container, mumbling apologies into Evelyn's shoulder. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "I know you didn't. It's really okay." Evelyn held her, this small person who smelled like kid shampoo and juice, and felt tears she could not quite suppress gathering in her eyes. When Marlowe pulled back, Evelyn stood and found Dash watching her with an expression she could not interpret. "That was—" He stopped, seeming to search for words. "That was exactly the right thing to do. What else would I have done? Yelled, gotten angry, made her feel bad about a mistake?" He paused. "My ex-wife would have yelled. She always yelled when Marlowe made messes." The comparison felt significant somehow. Evelyn excused herself to the bathroom to attempt cleaning the sweater, but mostly she needed 30 seconds alone to process what had just happened. She looked at herself in the mirror, expensive sweater, ruined makeup, slightly smudged hair falling out of its careful twist. She looked like someone who had been living, not someone who had been performing perfect existence. She looked like she might actually be capable of this. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Marlowe talked nonstop. Dash served food family style, and Evelyn ate spaghetti that was somehow better than most restaurant meals, despite being made in a kitchen the size of her bathroom. They sat at a table meant for two, squeezed together, elbows bumping, and it felt more like family than anything Evelyn had experienced at Catherine's formal dining table. After Marlowe was in bed, Dash and Evelyn sat on the couch with coffee, the dishes done the apartment quiet in the way places became after children were asleep. The distance between them felt smaller than it had that first day at Rosie's diner. "You were really good with her tonight." Dash's voice was quiet, almost tentative. "Not just the juice thing, all of it. The zoo, the gift, everything. You're more natural at this than you think you are." "I'm terrified every second that I'm doing it wrong." "That's what makes you good at it. The parents who think they have all the answers are usually the ones screwing up their kids." He studied her over his coffee mug. "Can I ask you something personal? You're considering having a child with me. I think personal questions are reasonable. What happened with your mother, Bertini? Know you mentioned the kitten thing, but it feels like there's more. Evelyn stared into her coffee and considered deflecting. She was good at deflection. 3 decades of practice had made her an expert at changing subjects, redirecting conversations, protecting herself from vulnerability. But Dash had let her into his home, had let her hold his daughter when juice spilled, had trusted her with the most precious thing in his life. That deserved honesty in return. My mother is Catherine Thornton. If you've read business news, you've probably seen her name. She built Thornton Industries from inheritance into empire through sheer force of will and absolute refusal to show weakness. Emotions were tools to be exploited in others and eliminated in herself. She raised me the same way. The kitten wasn't an isolated incident. No, that was relatively mild compared to some of her methods. Evelyn took a breath, deciding how much to reveal. When I was 11, I came home crying because girls at school had been cruel about my clothes being too formal. Catherine made me stand in front of a mirror and repeat, "I do not care what others think," 500 times. I counted out loud. She counted with me. It took 3 hours. Dash had gone very still. Jesus. When I was 16, I mentioned wanting to study art history instead of business. She removed every painting from my bedroom, sold them, and replaced them with stock market charts. She said if I was going to be a Thornton, I needed to see profit in everything, including art. That's abuse, Evelyn. You know that, right? Hearing him say her first name without the formal miss felt significant. I know it wasn't healthy, but I don't know if I'd call it abuse. She never hit me. She provided everything I needed. Accept love, accept emotional support, accept permission to be a person instead of a business asset. His voice was gentle but firm. My ex-wife was emotionally neglectful toward Marlo. Never hit her either. Still caused damage that we're working through. Abuse isn't always physical. The validation was unexpected and overwhelming. Evelyn found herself blinking back in tears for the second time that evening. I'm worried I'll be like her, that I'll damage our child the way she damaged me. You won't. How can you possibly know that? Because you're here, because you're trying to learn. Because you spent 4 weeks researching me to make sure I was good enough to be the father. Your mother would have just hired someone and never questioned whether they were capable of love. You're already different. The words settled into spaces Evelyn had not known were hollow. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that intention and effort could overcome programming that had been embedded since childhood. The doubt remained, but it was smaller than before. They talked until midnight, conversation flowing easier than it had during any of their planned meetings. Dash told stories about Marlo's early years, about the terror of single parenting, about the small victories that made the struggle worthwhile. Evelyn found herself laughing at his impressions of clueless first-time dad moments, feeling something like friendship developing alongside the co-parenting partnership. When she finally left standing in the doorway with her juice-stained sweater and her hair completely fallen out of its professional twist, Dash smiled at her with genuine warmth. Same time next week. Absolutely. The friendship deepened over the following weeks through accumulated small moments. Coffee meetings turned into lunch meetings. Formal discussions about contracts gave way to actual conversations about books, music, childhood memories. Evelyn discovered Dash had a wicked sense of humor beneath the responsible father exterior. Dash discovered Evelyn could be funny when she let her guard down. The ice cream incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. They had picked up Marlo from school together, the three of them falling into a routine that felt increasingly natural. The weather was unseasonably warm, and Marlo lobbied for ice cream with the persistence of a skilled negotiator. Please, Daddy, it's so hot, and I ate all my vegetables at lunch. Dash glanced at Evelyn, and she saw the silent question. Are you okay with this? She nodded, and they detoured to a shop that advertised 50 flavors and made everything fresh daily. Marlo pressed her face against the glass case, overwhelmed by options. Evelyn found herself about to order for the child one small vanilla safe and simple when Dash's hand touched her arm lightly. Did you ask what she wants? The reminder was gentle, but it hit like a slap. Evelyn had been about to make a unilateral decision, exercising control without consultation, exactly the way Catherine would have done. She caught herself mid-order and turned to Marlo. What flavor sounds good to you, sweetie? Marlo's face lit up. Cookie dough with gummy bears mixed in. The combination sounded horrific to Evelyn's refined palate, but she ordered it without judgment. Watching Marlo's joy over the rainbow-colored monstrosity that resulted was worth the death of good taste. When the child offered her a spoonful to try, Evelyn accepted it despite internal protests. It was, as expected, disgustingly sweet and texturally chaotic. Her face must have shown her opinion because both Dash and Marlo burst out laughing. Evelyn found herself laughing too at herself, at the absurdity of her situation, at the fact that she was eating gummy bears and ice cream and somehow enjoying the experience despite the flavor. "You hate it," Marlo giggled. "I really do, but I like seeing you happy more than I care about flavor." The words came out without conscious thought, honest in a way that made Dash pause mid-bite of his own ice cream. Their eyes met over Marlo's head, and something passed between them that felt like recognition. They were not business partners navigating a contract anymore. They were becoming something else, maybe friends, maybe family, definitely more than strangers. The late-night phone call started organically. Evelyn would find herself unable to sleep, staring at her ceiling at 3 a.m., and her thumb would dial Dash's number before conscious thought intervened. The first time she almost hung up before he answered, certain she was crossing a line. His voice was groggy. "Hello. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called. Go back to sleep." "Evelyn, what's wrong?" The grogginess disappeared, replaced by alert concern. "Nothing's wrong. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about whether I'm capable of being the parent our child will need." She heard rustling as he apparently sat up. "Want to talk about it?" They talked until sunrise. Evelyn admitted fears she had never voiced, that she would be cold, that she would damage the child with her inability to express love, that genetics or environment or some combination would make her replicate Catherine's parenting style. Dash listened without judgment and offered reassurance that sounded genuine rather than placating. "The fact that you're afraid of becoming your mother means you won't. People who don't question themselves are the dangerous ones. You're already overthinking every decision, which means you care deeply about getting it right. What if caring deeply isn't enough? Then we figure it out together. That's the whole point of this arrangement, right? You don't have to do it alone." The words settled something anxious in Evelyn's chest. She was so accustomed to operating independently, solving problems through force of will and financial resources, that the concept of actual partnership felt foreign. But sitting in her dark bedroom, talking to someone who seemed to understand her fear without being frightened by it, Evelyn felt less alone than she had in years. The calls became regular occurrences. Sometimes Evelyn initiated them, sometimes Dash did. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their hopes for the future, their mutual confusion about how to navigate the situation they had created. Somewhere in those conversations, friendship evolved into something neither of them had anticipated or planned for. The thunderstorm that changed everything arrived on a Thursday evening in October. Evelyn was at Dash's apartment reviewing baby-proofing catalogs. They had officially decided to move forward with trying to conceive, and the reality was beginning to feel tangible. Marlo had been in bed for 20 minutes when the first crack of thunder rattled windows. The little girl appeared in the doorway seconds later, eyes wide with fear, clutching her stuffed elephant. "Daddy!" Dash stood immediately. "Hey, Pumpkin, it's just thunder." Another crack closer this time. Marlo yelped, and instead of running to her, father ran to Evelyn. The choice was instinctive, unconscious, and it caught everyone by surprise. Small arms wrapped around Evelyn's waist, face buried against her stomach. "I'm scared." Evelyn froze. Every instinct screamed that she was unqualified for this moment, that she would do or say something wrong, that comforting a frightened child required skills she had never developed. But Marlo was trembling, and thunder crashed again, and there was no time to overthink. Her arms came up slowly, awkwardly, wrapping around the small shoulders. "You're safe, sweetie. I've got you." Marlo burrowed closer. Evelyn looked helplessly at Dash, who was watching with an expression that suggested this moment meant something significant. He nodded encouragement, and Evelyn found herself swaying slightly, the way she had seen parents do to soothe crying children. A melody surfaced from memory, something her nanny had sung when Evelyn was very small, before Catherine had decided the woman was too affectionate and dismissed her. The words came back haltingly, French lyrics from a lullaby about the moon and stars and being safe through the night. Evelyn sang quietly, voice rough from disuse but strengthening as the verses continued. Marlo's trembling slowed. The thunder seemed less frightening, with someone holding her, singing to her, making her feel protected. When she finally pulled back to look up at Evelyn, her eyes were wet but no longer terrified. That was pretty. What language was that? French. It's a song someone used to sing to me when I was your age. Will you sing it to my baby brother or sister? The question punched through Evelyn's carefully maintained composure. You want me to? Yeah, it made me feel safe. The baby should feel safe too. Marlo yawned, the storm forgotten, and allowed Dash to carry her back to bed. Evelyn remained on the couch, still feeling the phantom weight of child arms around her waist, still hearing the echo of words she had not realized she remembered. When Dash returned, he sat beside her without speaking for a long moment. You're a natural at this. His voice was quiet, almost awed. I don't think you believe it yet, but you are. I didn't know what I was doing. That's what everyone feels. You think I knew what I was doing when Marlo was born? I was terrified. Still am, sometimes. But you do it anyway, and eventually instinct kicks in. He shifted slightly closer. The fact that she came to you instead of me, that's huge. She trusts you completely. I didn't expect it to feel like this. Like what? Evelyn struggled to articulate emotions she barely recognized. Like I matter. Like I'm not replaceable. Like someone needs me for something other than business decisions or money. Understanding flooded Dash's expression. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but the warmth of palm against palm sent electricity up Evelyn's arm. Neither of them moved, both suddenly aware of proximity and possibility, and a line they had agreed not to cross. You matter, Evelyn, not because of what you can provide or what you can do, just because you're you. The words undid her. Tears spilled over despite her best effort to control them, and Dash pulled her into a hug that felt nothing like business partnership and everything like human connection. Evelyn let herself be held, let herself cry, let herself experience comfort she had not known she needed. When they pulled apart, faces were too close, breath mingling, something dangerous sparking between them. Dash's hand came up to cup her cheek, and Evelyn leaned into the touch like a plant seeking sunlight. We shouldn't. His words contradicted the way his thumb stroked her cheekbone. Definitely not. Neither of them moved away. The almost kiss hung in the air between them, fraught with everything they had agreed not to let happen. The timer on the oven saved them. Dash had put garlic bread in before the storm, and the beep shattered the moment. They separated quickly, both slightly flushed, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. The rest of the evening was marked by careful distance and overly polite conversation. When Evelyn left, the good night was awkward, both of them acutely aware of what had almost happened. She drove home through streets still wet from rain and tried to convince herself that the wanting she felt was temporary, situational, nothing that would complicate their carefully constructed arrangement. The lying was unconvincing, even to herself. The denial phase lasted 3 weeks. Evelyn threw herself into work, attended charity functions, filled her schedule so completely that she barely had time to think. But she thought about Dash constantly, his laugh, his patience with Marlo, the way he had held her through tears without making her feel weak. Dash was going through similar struggles, though. Evelyn only learned this later. He confided in Royce, who told him exactly what he did not want to hear. You're falling for her, bro. No, we're just friends, co-parents. Yeah, and I'm the king of England. You talk about her constantly. You smile when she texts. This is textbook. It can't happen. We have an agreement. Agreements can change. Royce's voice was gentle but firm. Look, I get that you're scared, but maybe this is the universe telling you that you found something real. Maybe you should stop fighting it. The confession came on a rainy night in early November. They had fallen into the habit of these evening walks after Marlo was asleep, Dash using a baby monitor app while they circled his block, talking about everything and nothing. Rain had started unexpectedly, and they took shelter under a bodega awning pressed close together. Dash spoke first, voice low. This isn't just about co-parenting anymore. Is it? Not a question. A statement of fact that Evelyn could not deny. No, it's not. When did it change for you? The thunderstorm, I think. When Marlo ran to me and I realized I would do anything to keep her safe. And then later when you held me and I felt like I could actually be okay. She looked at him, finally admitting what she had been denying for weeks. I'm falling for you, Dash. I don't know how to stop it, and I'm terrified it's going to ruin everything. His hand found hers in the space between them. I'm terrified too, because if this goes wrong, it's not just you and me who get hurt. It's Marlo. It's our future child. The stakes are higher than any relationship I've ever had. So what do we do? I don't know. He turned to face her, fully rain misting around them, city lights reflecting in puddles. But I know that I can't stop thinking about you. I know that when you're not around, I'm counting hours until I see you again. I know that this scares the hell out of me, and I want it anyway. Evelyn felt something release in her chest, some final restraint giving way. We said this wouldn't happen. We were wrong. His free hand came up to cup her face the way it had during the thunderstorm. Can I kiss you? We probably shouldn't. That's not what I asked. Then yes, please yes. The kiss was everything and nothing like Evelyn expected. Gentle at first, tentative, both of them, half expecting the other to pull away. But neither did. The kiss deepened, became something that spoke of weeks of suppressed want and the terrifying recognition of genuine connection. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Evelyn felt fundamentally changed. Oh, her voice came out shaky. Yeah, oh. They stood under the awning while rain fell harder, not quite ready to return to reality. Marlo's voice came through Dash's phone monitor, a sleepy call for water. The moment shattered, bringing them back to their actual lives, to the complications they had just made infinitely more complex. As they walked back to the apartment, hands still clasped, Evelyn saw movement in a car across the street. A flash of silver hair, a face she knew better than her own. Catherine watching from behind tinted windows, face twisted in fury. Ice flooded Evelyn's veins. She had been so careful, so discreet, but somehow her mother had found out. The implications crashed over her like a wave Catherine would never allow. This would destroy Dash and Marlo. Without hesitation, would ensure Evelyn spent the rest of her life regretting this choice. Dash felt her go rigid. What's wrong? My mother, she's here, she saw us. His grip tightened on her hand. So we explain. We tell her we're in a relationship. You don't understand. She'll destroy you. She'll take everything from you out of spite. Let her try. But Evelyn knew better. She had seen Catherine dismantle people who posed less of a threat than Dash did. Business rivals, competitors, anyone who challenged Thornton's supremacy, Catherine had crushed them systematically and without remorse. A single father from Brooklyn with no resources and no connections would be easy prey. The car pulled away slowly, Catherine's message clear. I see you, I know. This won't stand. Evelyn's phone buzzed immediately, a text from her mother, brief and devastating. End this in 48 hours or I begin. You know what I'm capable of. The 48-hour countdown began the moment Catherine's text arrived. Evelyn stood in Dash's apartment phone screen, glowing with her mother's threat, and felt the walls closing in with familiar, suffocating pressure. Every instinct built over 34 years screamed the same message. Catherine always won. Resistance was futile. The only choice was submission or total destruction. Dash was saying something, his hand still holding hers, but the words reached Evelyn through layers of panic that made comprehension impossible. She pulled away gently, needing physical distance to think clearly, needing air that did not smell like the life she was about to lose. I have to go. Evelyn, wait. We can figure this out together. You don't understand what she's capable of. The last person who challenged her lost everything, his career, his reputation, his ability to work in his industry ever again. She doesn't make empty threats. Then we fight back. The suggestion was so naive that it almost made Evelyn laugh. Fight Catherine Thornton. With what weapons? Dash had no money, no connections, no protection against the kind of systematic destruction her mother specialized in. And Marlo would be caught in the crossfire, an innocent child destroyed because Evelyn had been selfish enough to want something real. She left without another word, ignoring Dash's calls after her driving through rain-slicked streets that blurred through tears she refused to acknowledge. The penthouse felt cavernous and cold when she arrived, exactly the prison it had always been. Evelyn stood at the window overlooking Manhattan and understood that she had exactly two choices. End things with Dash immediately and completely, or watch Catherine systematically destroy him and Marlo while forcing Evelyn to witness every moment. The decision made itself. Love was a luxury she could not afford, not when it came with a price this steep. Better to be alone and miserable than responsible for ruining lives that had been fine before she inserted herself into them. The text she sent was brief, clinical, designed to cauterize the wound quickly. This was a mistake. I'm sorry, please don't contact me again. She blocked his number before he could respond. The action felt like amputating a limb to stop infection from spreading, necessary and agonizing in equal measure. The withdrawal happened in stages. First came the call. She did not answer the text that arrived but could not be seen. Then came Dash appearing at Thornton Tower, only to be turned away by security with instructions Evelyn had left that morning. The image on the security monitor, Dash arguing with guards, frustrated and confused, nearly broke her resolve. But she pictured Marlowe's gap-toothed smile, imagined that smile disappearing under the weight of Catherine's retribution, and stayed strong. Days became a week became 2. Evelyn returned to the life she had built before Dash, 16-hour workdays, charity events, board meetings, the endless cycle of productivity masking emptiness. She told herself this was better, safer, more aligned with who she actually was. The lying grew easier with repetition. Marlowe's questions were relayed through Royce, who somehow got a message past Evelyn's defenses through a colleague who owed him a favor. The words were devastating in their simplicity. "Where's Miss Evelyn? Did I make her mad? Daddy won't tell me what happened, but he's sad all the time now." Evelyn deleted the message and cried in her office bathroom for 20 minutes, then fixed her makeup and returned to the quarterly earnings call as though nothing had happened. Catherine appeared at the penthouse 3 weeks into the silence, radiating satisfaction like a predator surveying conquered territory. She brought dinner again, the same private chef, the same oppressive ritual of formal dining. "I'm pleased you came to your senses." Catherine cut her steak with precise movements. That man was completely unsuitable. A single father with no prospects, you would have been laughed out of every boardroom in the country. Evelyn pushed food around her plate without eating. "Is that all? Don't be petulant. I saved you from a tremendous mistake. You should thank me. Thank you for destroying the first real thing I've ever had. Thank you for ensuring I'll spend my life alone and miserable like you." The words escaped before Evelyn could cage them. Catherine's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, eyes going glacial in a way that preceded calculated cruelty. "Alone, I'm ensuring you maintain your position, your legacy, your worth. That man wanted your money. They all do. He wanted nothing from me. That was the entire point. Then he was lying or stupid, and either way unsuitable." Catherine dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "We're done discussing this. I expect you at the charity gala Friday. The Vanderbilts will be there and their son is recently divorced. Excellent pedigree, old money, appropriate match." Evelyn stood chair scraping back. "Get out." "Excuse me. This is my home. You're no longer welcome here. Get out." Catherine's surprise was visible for perhaps 2 seconds before fury replaced it. She stood slowly, drawing herself to full height, every inch the matriarch who had built empires through force of will. "You forget yourself. I made you. Everything you are, everything you have exists because of me. Everything I am is broken. Everything I have is empty. And it's all because of you." Evelyn's voice shook but held. "Please leave, now." Catherine gathered her coat with movements sharp as breaking glass. At the door, she turned back with the expression that had preceded childhood punishments. "You'll regret this. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but eventually you'll understand that I was protecting you from yourself." The door closed with quiet finality. Evelyn stood alone in her penthouse and felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, not triumph, but the first stirrings of something that might eventually become courage. The research began that night. If she was going to stand up to Catherine, she needed ammunition. Evelyn had access to Thornton Industries files through her position as co-CEO, though she had never abused that access before. Tonight, ethical boundaries felt less important than survival. Catherine's private office files were password protected, but Evelyn had watched her mother type the code enough times to guess correctly on the third attempt. What she found in the folders marked legal confidential made her stomach turn. Documentation of bribes dating back 15 years. City officials paid off to expedite building permits. Inspectors compensated to overlook code violations. The amounts were staggering, $2 million in bribes alone. Any single transaction would trigger investigation if authorities knew about it. Then there were the emails. Catherine to the construction manager on the building that collapsed in 2018, explicitly ordering him to cut steel specifications below code requirements to save money. His written objection, "This violates safety standards and puts lives at risk," followed by Catherine's response, "Do it or you're terminated. The building will be fine." The building had not been fine. Structural failure 6 months after completion, 2 people hospitalized with serious injuries. Thornton Industries had settled quietly NDAs, signed in no admission of guilt. But the emails proved Catherine had known the danger and proceeded anyway. There were other discoveries. Evidence of tax evasion through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Documentation of threatened board members who had opposed Catherine's decisions. A pattern of systematic intimidation and illegal activity spanning decades. Evelyn photographed everything with shaking hands, using her personal phone rather than anything connected to company servers. The evidence gathered in her camera roll felt both powerful and dangerous, a weapon that could destroy Catherine but would damage Thornton Industries in the process. Collateral damage included innocent employees, investors, her own career. But Dash's face kept surfacing in her memory, Marlowe's questions about where Miss Evelyn had gone, the life they might have built if Catherine had not intervened with her usual scorched earth tactics. Some battles were worth fighting, even when victory meant losing everything. The next morning, Evelyn called Thomas Webb with a request that made even the experienced detective pause. "Miss Thornton, what you're describing could end your mother's career, possibly land her in prison. Are you certain?" "I'm certain she'll destroy everyone I care about if someone doesn't stop her. I have the evidence. I need you to verify it's authentic and help me understand the legal implications. This is beyond my expertise. You need an attorney. Not corporate counsel, someone who specializes in whistleblower cases and has no connection to Thornton Industries." Webb provided a name. Jessica Park, the family attorney who had helped draft the co-parenting agreement, was too close to the situation. But Park recommended a colleague, Mitchell Sterling, former prosecutor turned defense attorney, known for taking on powerful corporations without fear. Sterling's office occupied a modest space in a building that had seen better decades. The man himself was 58, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and skeptical in the way lawyers became after years of watching people lie to them. Evelyn laid out everything, the evidence, Catherine's threats, the situation with Dash and Marlowe. Sterling listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his expression revealing nothing. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her with uncomfortable intensity. "Why are you doing this? Revenge, justice, love? All of it. None of it. I'm tired of being afraid." "That's the best answer you could have given." He tapped the photos on his phone where Evelyn had forwarded the evidence. "This is enough to trigger SEC investigation. Criminal charges are possible. Your mother will fight with every resource at her disposal, which means you're about to become enemy number one. Your own career will suffer. The company will suffer. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to stop letting her control my life through fear." Sterling smiled slightly. "Then let's talk strategy. We don't go directly to authorities. That makes you look vindictive. We present this to the Thornton Industries board, first give them opportunity to handle it internally. If they refuse, then we escalate. It's cleaner legally and makes you look like you were trying to protect the company." The plan was sound. The execution would be brutal. But Evelyn had spent 34 years being Catherine's obedient creation. The time for obedience had ended. She tried to call Dash that evening, remembered she had blocked him, and had to go through the complicated process of unblocking to send a text. "I know I have no right to ask, but I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" The response took 3 hours, long enough that Evelyn assumed he had decided she was not worth the trouble. When the message finally arrived, it was brief. "Rosie's, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Don't block me again." Fair enough. She deserved his anger, deserved whatever coldness he showed her. The important thing was getting him to understand why she had done what she did, and to warn him that things were about to get significantly worse before they got better. Rosie's diner looked exactly the same, minus the warmth of first meeting. Dash was already in the corner booth when Evelyn arrived, and his expression was carefully neutral in a way that hurt worse than open hostility would have. She slid into the seat across from him and jumped straight to the point because small talk felt impossible. "My mother threatened to destroy you and Marlowe if I didn't end things. I panicked. I thought protecting you meant staying away. You could have told me that instead of disappearing without explanation. You made Marlo think she did something wrong. Do you have any idea how many times she asked me what she did to make you leave? The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn had been so focused on protecting them from Catherine's active destruction that she had not considered the passive damage her withdrawal would cause. I'm sorry, I was trying to keep you safe. By making unilateral decisions without consulting me. That's exactly what you accused your mother of doing, controlling people for their own good without giving them choice. He rubbed his face tiredly. I spent 3 weeks thinking I had imagined everything. The connection, the kiss, all of it. Thinking maybe you had just been playing some rich person game and got bored. It wasn't a game. It was the most real thing in my life. And I was terrified Catherine would take it away, so I gave it away first. Evelyn reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand. I found evidence of her crimes, bribery, tax evasion, safety violations. I'm taking it to the board and then to authorities if necessary. She's going to retaliate probably against both of us, but I'm done being afraid. Dash's expression shifted from anger to concern. You're going to war with your mother. I'm going to stop her from hurting anyone else, which means things will get bad for me and probably for you too, since she knows about us. I wanted to warn you. Give you a chance to walk away before you're dragged into it. Walk away. He did touch her hand, then covering it with his own. You spent 3 weeks supposedly protecting me by leaving. Did it occur to you that I might be willing to fight beside you instead of being shielded like I'm made of glass? She'll come after you viciously. Your career, your custody, anything she can weaponize. Then we'll handle it together. That's what partners do, Evelyn. They face things together. The word partner undid her careful composure. Tears spilled over despite her best effort to maintain control in public. Dash moved to her side of the booth, pulling her against his chest, and Evelyn let herself be held while crying in a diner at 2 in the afternoon, not caring who saw. When she could speak again, her voice came out rough. I'm going to need help gathering more evidence, and I think I know someone who might be willing to testify against Catherine. Who? My Aunt Margaret. Catherine destroyed her relationship with the man she loved 30 years ago. If anyone has reason to help bring her down, it's family she's already hurt. Finding Margaret Thornton proved easier than expected. She lived in a small town upstate about 2 hours north of the city in a cottage that looked like it belonged on a postcard. Evelyn had not seen her aunt since childhood. Catherine had cut off contact when Margaret refused to support some business decision and had been deemed disloyal. The woman who opened the door was 67, gray-haired, wearing paint-stained jeans and a warm smile that reminded Evelyn heartbreakingly of childhood before Catherine's training had fully taken hold. Recognition dawned in Margaret's face, followed by something that might have been sadness or regret. Evelyn, you look just like your mother, but your eyes are kinder. May I come in? The cottage interior was everything Catherine would have hated, cluttered with books and art supplies warm with afternoon sun, through uncurtained windows lived in rather than showcased. Photos covered one wall, and Evelyn found herself drawn to an image of young Margaret with a man who had his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing. That's James, Margaret's voice carried decades of loss. We were going to be married. I was 32, he was 35. High school history teacher. Good man, kind. Made me laugh every single day. What happened? Your mother happened. She told our mother that James was unsuitable, wrong social class, wrong profession, wrong everything. Mother agreed. When I refused to end things, Catherine took matters into her own hands. Margaret touched the photo gently. She had him fired from his teaching position, spread rumors that he had inappropriate relationships with students. Completely fabricated, but the investigation destroyed his reputation anyway. He left town rather than fight it. I never saw him again. Evelyn sank onto the couch, the story confirming what she had already suspected. Catherine's pattern had started long before Evelyn's lifetime, hurting anyone who threatened the Thornton image or Catherine's control. I came here to ask for your help. Evelyn explained the evidence, the plan, the risk. Margaret listened without interrupting, and when the explanation finished, she nodded firmly. What do you need from me? Testimony, confirmation that Catherine has a pattern of destroying relationships she doesn't approve of. It establishes motive and character, makes the criminal evidence more credible. I'll do it. I should have stood up to her 30 years ago. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't have grown up the way you did. The observation was gentle but devastating. Evelyn had spent her life believing Catherine's behavior was normal, that all wealthy families operated this way, that her own inability to conform was personal failure rather than healthy rebellion. Hearing validation from someone who understood Catherine's tactics felt like being given permission to trust her own perceptions. They spent 3 hours going through Margaret's memories, documenting incidents that painted a picture of systematic control and manipulation. Margaret had kept letters, Catherine's written threats, when Margaret defied her proof of the lies Catherine had told to destroy James's career. The documentation was 30 years old, but still damning. Driving back to the city with Margaret's testimony recorded and evidence secured, Evelyn felt something she had not experienced in weeks' hope. She was not alone in this fight. Dash was beside her, Royce was supporting them, Margaret was willing to testify. Even Sterling seemed confident they had enough to proceed. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 5 days to prepare to review evidence to brace for Catherine's inevitable counterattack. Sterling advised treating it like a trial present, facts clearly anticipate. Objections remain professional, regardless of how personal Catherine made it. Evelyn spent those 5 days in a state of controlled terror. She reviewed documents until her eyes ached, rehearsed her presentation, prepared for every possible question or challenge. Dash kept her grounded, reminding her to eat and sleep and remember why this mattered. Marlowe made her a good luck card covered in glitter and hearts, apparently informed by Dash that Miss Evelyn had something important to do. The night before the meeting, Evelyn could not sleep. She stood at her penthouse windows, watching the city that had always felt more like a cage than a home, and her phone rang with Dash's number. Can't sleep either. His voice was warm, familiar, anchoring. Terrified. What if I'm wrong? What if this destroys innocent people? Then you pick up the pieces and fix what you can. But Evelyn, you're not wrong. Your mother has been hurting people for decades. Sometimes the only way to stop a fire is to let it burn itself out, even if things get damaged in the process. They talked until dawn, and when Evelyn walked into Thornton Tower at 8 a.m., she felt steadier than she had any right to feel, given what she was about to attempt. The boardroom was exactly as intimidating as she remembered: long table leather chairs, portraits of previous Thornton generations watching from the walls like judges. 12 board members filed in, Catherine among them, radiating confidence. She shot Evelyn a look that promised retribution for the penthouse ejection, but clearly assumed this was routine quarterly business. Sterling sat beside Evelyn in legal representation, lending weight to what she was about to present. The board chairman, Harold Westbrook, called the meeting to order with his usual efficiency. Miss Thornton requested this emergency session. The floor is yours. Evelyn stood, tablet in hand, containing copies of all evidence distributed to board members' devices. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I've discovered evidence of systematic criminal activity within Thornton Industries. Specifically, bribery of city officials, tax evasion through offshore accounts, and safety violations that directly led to the 2019 building collapse. The evidence is comprehensive and documented. I'm presenting it to this board first to allow internal resolution before involving outside authorities. She walked them through each piece of evidence methodically. The bribes with receipts and wire transfer records. The tax evasion with account numbers and transaction histories. The emails proving Catherine knew about and ordered the safety violations that resulted in injuries. Catherine's face transitioned from confusion to rage to calculated coldness. When Evelyn finished, silence hung heavy enough to feel oppressive. Board members exchanged glances, clearly struggling to process accusations against the woman who had led them for decades. Catherine stood slowly, commanding attention through sheer force of presence. This is a coup attempt. My daughter upset about personal matters, trying to discredit me using doctored evidence. The evidence isn't doctored. Every document can be verified by independent forensic accountants. Every email has metadata proving authenticity. Evelyn kept her voice level, professional. This isn't personal. This is protecting the company from legal liability. It's absolutely personal. You're angry because I prevented you from embarrassing this family with that unsuitable man and his child. So you manufactured this crisis to retaliate. Harold Westbrook cleared his throat. Miss Thornton the Younger, these are serious allegations. Can you confirm this evidence came from legitimate sources? It came from Catherine's own files. I had access as co-CEO. I violated no laws in obtaining it. Another board member, Patricia Reynolds, spoke up. If this is authentic, we're looking at potential criminal charges. Not just against Catherine, but the company itself that could face massive penalties. Sterling interjected smoothly, which is why we're presenting it to you first. If the board acts decisively, suspends, Catherine conducts independent investigation, cooperates with authorities, the company can position itself as a victim of one individual's actions rather than systemic corruption. That minimizes damage. Catherine's laugh was sharp and bitter. You think you can remove me? I'd have built this company. I am Thornton Industries. Actually, you're an employee who has apparently committed multiple felonies while in that employment. Evelyn forced herself to meet her mother's eyes. The board has a fiduciary duty to shareholders. That duty supersedes loyalty to any individual, even you. The vote was called. 7 in favor of suspending Catherine pending investigation, 2 against 3 abstaining. Catherine was officially removed from her position, effective immediately banned from company premises, placed on administrative leave, while forensic accountants and lawyers reviewed everything. She gathered her belongings with movements so controlled they appeared almost robotic. At the door, she turned back to face Evelyn, and the rage in her eyes was colder than anything Evelyn had seen before. You've destroyed your family, your legacy, everything I built for you. I will make sure you regret this for the rest of your life. I already regret it. I regret that I waited 34 years to stop you. The door closed behind Catherine, and Evelyn sank into her chair. Adrenaline crashed, leaving her shaky and exhausted. Sterling touched her shoulder briefly. That was incredibly brave, also reckless, also necessary. You did well. The board meeting concluded with the formation of an investigation committee and the decision to self-report to the SEC. Evelyn's involvement would be noted as whistleblower, which offered some legal protection, but would make her a target for anyone loyal to Catherine. The retaliation began within hours. By evening, tabloid websites were running stories: Thornton heiress betrays mother in corporate coup, and family drama at America's premier real estate empire. The articles painted Evelyn as vindictive, unstable, possibly motivated by romantic entanglement with an unsuitable man. Photos appeared. Evelyn and Dash kissing in the rain. Evelyn is leaving his Brooklyn apartment. The narrative being constructed was clear: spoiled rich girl, abandoning family for ill-advised relationship, manufacturing crisis to justify her rebellion. Dash called as the third article went live. Are you okay? I knew this would happen. Sterling warned me. Royce got a call from someone claiming to represent Catherine, asking questions about my finances, my custody arrangement, whether I've had drug or alcohol issues. They're building a case to make me look like a gold digger or worse. Evelyn's stomach clenched. She's going to try to take Marlo from you. She's going to try. She won't succeed. I've been a model parent for 6 years. My custody is rock solid. But Catherine had destroyed people with solid positions before. The documentation, she could fabricate the witnesses, she could produce the lawyers she could hire, all of it added up to serious threat. Evelyn had triggered war, and Dash was caught in the crossfire exactly as she had feared. The CPS visit happened on Thursday. Dash called from his apartment, voice tight with controlled anger, and Evelyn drove to Brooklyn immediately despite the risk of making things worse. A social worker was documenting the apartment when Evelyn arrived. The woman was professional, but thorough, photographing everything, asking questions about Marlo's care school attendance, medical records. Marlo sat on the couch clutching her stuffed elephant, clearly confused and frightened by the official intrusion. Miss Evelyn. The little girl ran over the moment she saw her, and Evelyn caught her in a hug that felt both natural and desperately needed. The social worker made a note. And you are Evelyn Thornton, family friend. The Evelyn Thornton, the one who's been in the news, Dash interjected before Evelyn could respond. Yes, and if you're here because someone made allegations about my parenting, I'd suggest checking who made those allegations and what their motivation might be. I'm just investigating a complaint, Mr. Thorne. Someone reported concerns about your living situation and your daughter's welfare. My daughter is healthy, happy, attending school regularly, and well cared for. You can verify all of that through her pediatrician and teacher. The social worker did verify it, making calls while Evelyn sat with Marlo and tried to distract the child from what was happening. By the time the woman left, she seemed satisfied that the complaint was unfounded, but the visit itself was traumatizing. Marlo cried after the social worker left, and Dash held her while Evelyn made hot chocolate and tried to control her own rage. "Your mother did this." Dash's voice was flat when Marlo finally fell asleep. "I know, and she'll do worse if we don't stop her." How do we stop someone with unlimited resources and no conscience? Evelyn thought of the evidence, the investigation, the board members who had voted against Catherine. We make her face consequences for the first time in her life, and we refuse to back down no matter how ugly it gets. The media circus intensified over the following week. More stories, each one more invasive than the last. Details about Dash's divorce, Amanda's abandonment of Marlo financial struggles, the fertility clinic donation that Catherine's investigators had somehow discovered. The narrative was clear. Struggling single father using wealthy woman for financial security, destroying family dynasty in the process. Public opinion split predictably. Some people saw Evelyn as brave whistleblower standing up to corrupt family. Others saw her as spoiled rich girl throwing a tantrum. Social media erupted with hashtags, #team, Evelyn and her Thornton family, both trending strangers weighing in on decisions they could not possibly understand. Through it all, Dash remained steady. He shielded Marlo from the worst of it, continued working, refused to engage with reporters who camped outside his building. Royce and Mrs. Hartley formed a protective circle, running interference with journalists and providing character references to anyone who would listen. But the strain was visible. Dark circles under Dash's eyes, tension in his shoulders, the way he checked his phone constantly, waiting for the next attack. Evelyn felt the weight of responsibility crushing her. She had started this war, had dragged him into it, and now he was suffering consequences for her choices. Late one night, sitting in his apartment after Marlo was asleep, Dash voiced what they had both been thinking. "Maybe I should distance myself from you publicly. Let you fight this battle without me as ammunition against you." Evelyn's response was immediate and fierce. "No, absolutely not. We're not giving her that satisfaction. But if my presence is making things worse, your presence is the only thing keeping me sane. We're in this together. That's what you told me, remember? Partners face things together." He pulled her close and they sat in silence, drawing strength from proximity. The storm Catherine had unleashed showed no signs of abating, but somehow facing it together made the assault feel survivable. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the board members Catherine had thought was loyal, Patricia Reynolds, reached out to Evelyn directly with information that changed everything. They met in a coffee shop far from Thornton Tower, both women wary of surveillance. Patricia was 58 sharp and clearly struggling with divided loyalty. "I've been on the board for 12 years. Catherine brought me on when I was nobody, and I've been grateful for the opportunity." She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "But what you presented at that meeting, I can't ignore criminal activity. And there's something else you should know." She pulled out a folder containing documentation of other board members Catherine had compromised over the years. Threats, blackmail, material leverage used to ensure compliance. Patricia was not the only board member who wanted to oppose Catherine but feared the consequences. If you're going to take her down, you need to know who will actually stand with you when it matters. These 5 members will support removal if they're confident she can't retaliate. The others are too compromised or too afraid. The intelligence was invaluable. Evelyn now knew exactly which board members needed reassurance and protection, which ones would vote against Catherine if given cover to do so. The path to permanent removal became clearer. Sterling used the information to approach each vulnerable board member individually, offering legal protection in exchange for testimony about Catherine's intimidation tactics. Slowly, the coalition grew. By the time the formal board vote was scheduled for Catherine's permanent removal, Evelyn had 7 solid votes, 9 if 2 fence-sitters could be convinced. Catherine fought back with every weapon in her arsenal. Lawyers filed motions. Private investigators dug for dirt on anyone supporting Evelyn. The media campaign intensified, painting Evelyn as mentally unstable, possibly financially motivated, definitely betraying family values that Americans held sacred. But the evidence was too strong and the investigation was too thorough. Forensic accountants confirmed every bribe. SCC investigators verified the tax evasion. The construction manager from the collapsed building finally came forward, willing to testify about Catherine's explicit orders to violate safety codes. The final board meeting approached with the inevitability of Judgment Day. Catherine knew she was losing, that much was clear from her increasingly desperate tactics. The night before the vote, Evelyn's phone rang with her mother's number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Catherine's voice was different than Evelyn had ever heard it, not angry, not cold, but something approaching human. I'd like to meet, just you and me. No lawyers, no recording, one conversation before this all ends. Every instinct screamed trap, but Evelyn was curious about what Catherine might say when defeat was imminent, and curiosity outweighed caution. They met at Catherine's penthouse, far more opulent than Evelyn's, decorated with the sterile perfection that Catherine valued over warmth. Her mother looked older than Evelyn remembered, gray, more pronounced, lines deeper, as though the stress of the past weeks had aged her 5 years. Catherine poured expensive scotch neither of them touched. When she spoke, her voice carried exhaustion that bordered on resignation. I did everything for you, built this company, this legacy, this position. Everything was for you. Everything was for your vision of what I should be, not for who I actually am. Because who you actually are is weak, sentimental, vulnerable. The world destroys people like that. I was trying to make you strong enough to survive. You were making me as miserable as you are. Evelyn forced herself to hold her mother's gaze. Aunt Margaret told me about James, about how you destroyed her only chance at happiness because she chose wrong by your standards. Catherine flinched, barely visible, but definitely there. Margaret would have been miserable as a teacher's wife. I saved her from poverty and insignificance. She spent 35 years alone. Is that better than poverty? Is loneliness better than insignificance? She has security, comfort, dignity. She has regret. Evelyn moved closer, needing her mother to hear this. You're terrified that I'll be happy without you. Because if I can be happy with less money, less prestige, less control, then what does that say about the choices you made, about the life you chose? Catherine's mask finally cracked completely. Tears spilled over, shocking in a woman who had never displayed weakness in Evelyn's memory. When she spoke, her voice was raw. I didn't know another way. My mother raised me the same way I raised you. It was all I knew. I know, and I'm sorry that happened to you. But pain doesn't justify inflicting pain on others. You had a choice every day to repeat the cycle or break it. You chose repetition. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting your own fear. There's a difference. The words hung between them, stripping away decades of justification and leaving only truth. Catherine sat down heavily, looking defeated in a way Evelyn had never witnessed. For the first time, she seemed less like an invincible matriarch and more like a woman who had made terrible choices and was finally facing consequences. What happens now? Catherine's question was barely audible. Tomorrow the board votes on your permanent removal. The SEC is pursuing charges. You'll likely face criminal penalties, possibly jail time, depending on plea agreements. Evelyn paused, then offered something she had not planned to extend. But there's another option. What option? Resign immediately, admit to wrongdoing, cooperate fully with investigations, enter therapy with a trauma specialist to address the generational abuse cycle. Stay away from Thornton Industries and from my personal life. And in exchange, I'll advocate for reduced charges, use my position to ensure you're treated fairly rather than made an example of. And once you've done real work in therapy, once you can prove you've changed, we can discuss supervised contact with my future children. Catherine's eyes widened. You're pregnant? Not yet, but I will be, with Dash Thorne's child, and they will never experience what I experienced growing up. The silence stretched until Evelyn wondered if she had pushed too hard. Then Catherine nodded slowly, defeat evident in the gesture. I'll resign. I'll cooperate. But Evelyn, I don't know if I change. This is who I am. And then you don't meet your grandchildren. Choice is yours. It was the hardest thing Evelyn had ever said, but also necessary. Love without boundaries was not love, it was enabling. If Catherine could not change, could not break the cycle that had damaged 3 generations, then she had no place in the next generation's life. The board meeting the following day was anticlimactic. Catherine sent her resignation letter effective immediately. The investigation would continue, criminal charges would proceed, but the company was safe, and Evelyn's position was secure. Shareholders were relieved, employees cautiously optimistic, media spinning the story as corporate redemption. Evelyn left the boardroom and called Dash immediately. "It's over." She resigned. "Are you okay?" "I don't know. Ask me in 6 months." "Want to come over?" "Marlo's been asking about you nonstop, and I've been saying we needed to wait until things settled down." "I'll be there in 30 minutes. The reunion with Marlo was everything Evelyn needed. The little girl flew into her arms the moment she walked through the door, chattering about everything that had happened in the weeks they had been apart. Dash watched from the kitchen, smiling, and when Marlo finally paused for breath, he approached. "So now what?" Evelyn looked at him, at Marlo, at the apartment that felt more like home than her penthouse ever had. "Now we do what we planned before everything went sideways. We build a family." "You sure? Because the offer still stands. No pressure, no obligations. Walk away if you want to." She kissed him instead of answering verbally. When they pulled apart, Marlo was making exaggerated gagging sounds, and all three of them were laughing. 6 months later, Evelyn stood in Central Park wearing a simple white dress that Catherine would have hated for its lack of formality. Dash wore a suit that actually fit properly, purchased specifically for the occasion. Marlo served as flower girl, scattering petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy, her purple dress sparkling in afternoon sun. The gathering was intimate, 30 people who actually mattered, rather than hundreds who expected invitations. Dash's family, Royce and his girlfriend, Mrs. Hartley, with tissues already in hand, Margaret standing proudly in the front row, Sterling and Jessica, who had become friends through the legal battles. And in the back, barely visible, Catherine sat with her therapist, having been granted permission to attend under strict supervision. The vows were simple. Dash promised to keep melting ice one day at a time. Evelyn promised never to run away again. Both promised to face whatever came next as partners, as equals, as people who had chosen each other despite every logical reason not to. When they kissed, Marlo cheered loudest of anyone, and Evelyn thought about the woman she had been 17 weeks ago, isolated, controlled, convinced she was incapable of love. That woman felt like a stranger now. The pregnancy happened faster than expected. 1 month after the wedding, Evelyn took the test and stared at the positive result with emotions too complex to name. Dash found her sitting on the bathroom floor, still holding the test, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so scared." Her voice was barely a whisper. He sat beside her, pulling her close. "Me too, but we're scared together, right?" "Right." They told Marlo first, her excitement predictable and contagious. She immediately wanted to know if it would be a boy or girl, whether they could name it after her, if babies could eat pizza. Dash fielded questions with patience, while Evelyn tried to adjust to the reality of new life growing inside her. The pregnancy was textbook normal, except for the emotional chaos Evelyn experienced. Every milestone brought fear that she would fail, that Catherine's damage ran too deep, that she was doomed to repeat patterns despite best intentions. Dash countered every fear with patience, reminding her that awareness was half the battle, that trying was what mattered. Catherine attended therapy twice weekly, working through decades of trauma, with a specialist who did not tolerate manipulation or deflection. Progress was slow, but visible. The rage that had defined her softened marginally. The control that had driven her loosened slightly. She was not transformed, but she was changing. When Evelyn was 7 months pregnant, visibly showing. Despite the designer maternity clothes she had reluctantly purchased, Catherine requested a supervised meeting. Margaret attended as mediator, Sterling on standby in case things went badly. They met at a cafe. Margaret suggested neutral territory with escape routes if needed. Catherine looked different. Less makeup, softer clothes, gray hair, no longer dyed. She seemed smaller, somehow, less imposing. "You look well?" Catherine's voice was tentative, unsure. "Thank you. How's therapy going?" "Dr. Morrison says I have complex trauma from my own childhood. She says I was emotionally abused by my mother and coped by becoming the abuser myself. She says awareness doesn't excuse behavior, but it explains it." "Do you believe her?" Catherine took a long time answering. "I'm starting to. It's difficult accepting that everything I thought was strength was actually fear. That I damaged you, trying to prevent you from being damaged." Evelyn felt tears forming, but did not try to stop them. "I need you to understand something. This baby will never be locked in rooms, will never be punished for having emotions, will never feel that love is conditional on performance. I know. And if I can't respect that, I won't be part of their life. Dr. Morrison has been very clear about appropriate boundaries. Can you change enough to be safe? I don't know yet, but I'm trying. For the first time in my life, I'm actually trying to be different. It was not absolution. It was not even full reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement, and that was more than Evelyn had expected. They talked for an hour, carefully navigating topics that used to be landmines, finding small moments of connection that suggested future relationship might be possible. When Evelyn left, Margaret walked her to the car and spoke quietly. She may never be the mother you deserved, but she's trying to be better than she was. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for. Labor started on a Tuesday evening while Evelyn was reviewing nursery paint samples. The contractions felt nothing like she expected, sharper, more intense, making coherent thought difficult. Dash timed them, calmly packed the hospital bag they had prepared weeks ago, arranged for Mrs. Hartley to stay overnight with Marlo. At the hospital, Evelyn requested Marlo be allowed in the delivery room, wanting the little girl to be part of this from the beginning. The nurse seemed uncertain, but Dash's insistence, combined with Evelyn's determination, overcame objections. Marlo sat beside Evelyn's bed, holding her hand, providing commentary that was equal parts helpful and hilarious. When contractions intensified, the child whispered encouragement. "You're so brave, Miss Evelyn, almost like a superhero." Dash stood on Evelyn's other side, strong and steady, reminding her to breathe when pain made breathing seem impossible. And when their daughter finally arrived, Maya Elizabeth Thorne, screaming, and perfect Evelyn held her and cried harder than she had ever cried in her life. "I love you, I love you, I love you." The words repeated like a mantra, like prayer, like promise. Everything Catherine had never said Evelyn would say constantly. Marlo climbed carefully onto the bed, wanting to see her sister. "She's so tiny. Can I hold her?" They arranged the newborn in Marlo's arms with careful supervision, and the image burned itself into Evelyn's memory, this family they had built against all odds, this love that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. Dash took photos on his phone, capturing the moment, and Evelyn knew she would look at those pictures for the rest of her life. Catherine was not present for the birth. That boundary had been discussed and agreed upon. She needed to earn her way back into Evelyn's life, gradually prove sustained change before being granted access to vulnerable moments. But Evelyn sent her a single photo later that night, Maya wrapped in blankets, with a text message that felt significant despite its brevity. "Maya Elizabeth Thorne, 7 pounds 4 ounces, everyone healthy." The response came after 10 minutes. "She's beautiful. Congratulations. Thank you for letting me know." No demands for immediate visit, no criticism of the name choice, no attempt to take control, just acknowledgement and gratitude. It was progress, and progress was enough for now. 1 year later, Maya's first birthday party transformed Evelyn's penthouse from sterile showpiece into chaotic celebration. She had redecorated months ago, adding color, removing formal furniture, making the space actually livable. Toys occupied corners, children's books lined shelves, and the refrigerator displayed artwork from both Marlo and various toddler groups Maya attended. 40 people crowded the space, Dash's extended family, Royce, and his now fiancée, Mrs. Hartley, with her grandson fully recovered, Sterling and Jessica, who had become regular dinner guests, colleagues who had supported Evelyn through the corporate battle. Margaret had flown down from upstate, bringing a hand-painted rocking chair she had made herself. And in the corner, speaking quietly with her therapist, Catherine observed everything. She had been granted supervised visits 3 months ago after Dr. Morrison confirmed significant progress. The visits remained brief and carefully monitored, but they were happening. Catherine brought appropriate gifts, followed boundaries, did not attempt to control or criticize. Watching her mother play carefully with Maya on the floor, while Margaret supervised Evelyn, felt complicated emotions she was still learning to process. Catherine would never be the mother Evelyn had needed as a child. That damage was permanent. But maybe she could be a different grandmother, someone who had learned enough to avoid repeating the worst of her mistakes. Marlo was in her element, directing older children in games and explaining to younger ones how birthday parties worked. At 7, she had grown into her role as big sister with impressive skill, protective but not controlling, loving but allowing independence. Dash found Evelyn standing by the windows watching the city at sunset. He wrapped arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Thinking about anything specific or just overwhelmed by how far we've come? Both. Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we went from that awkward meeting at the fertility clinic to this. She gestured at the party at their family at the life they had built. Believe it. You earned every bit of it by being brave enough to change. Maya toddled over on unsteady legs, arms raised to be picked up. Evelyn scooped her up, the gesture now automatic, and Maya snuggled against her mother's shoulder with a complete trust that still made Evelyn's heart clench. Marlo joined them, slipping her hand into Dash's. This is the best party ever. Can we do it again tomorrow? Birthday parties are once a year, pumpkin, but we can celebrate other things whenever we want. Like what? Like being a family, like being together, like being happy despite all the stuff that tried to stop us. Marlo considered this with characteristic seriousness. So basically, we're celebrating every day. Basically, yeah. Later that evening, after guests had departed and children were asleep, Evelyn and Dash stood in the hallway between bedrooms. Maya in one room, Marlo in the other, both peaceful in sleep. The apartment was still messy from the party balloons, deflating cake crumbs on the floor, wrapping paper scattered, and it was perfect. You know what I realized today? Evelyn kept her voice low to avoid waking anyone. What's that? I spent 34 years believing I couldn't love because Catherine trained it out of me. But I was wrong. Love was always there. I just needed someone to teach me it was safe to feel it. Dash pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You taught yourself. I just stuck around while you figured it out. They stood together in the quiet, and Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear, the fighting, the choosing to be brave when every instinct screamed to run. She thought about Catherine slowly changing, about Margaret finding peace after decades of regret, about Marlo and Maya growing up in an environment where emotions were welcomed rather than punished. Some people said ice queens could never change, that people like Evelyn were too damaged to become warm. But standing in her hallway surrounded by evidence of love, sleeping children partner who had never given up family built through choice rather than obligation, Evelyn knew they were wrong. Ice did not stay frozen forever. All it needed was warmth. And she had found hers in the last place she expected, with a single dad, his daughter, and the courage to let herself melt completely.